The 8th of May 2020. Could I invite Councillor Mike Davidson to commence with a karakia timatanga.
Ka tūpuna te karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina, kia kita, ki mā taraki tai, e I ake ana te atakura, hei tio, hei hoku, ti hei ori ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. Now I have a few apologies. I'm a departure at 12:50. I think Pauline Cotter's temporary absence during the meeting, 10:15 to 11:15. Were there any other apologies? Would someone like to move that they be accepted? Sarah Templeton, seconded James Goff. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Declarations of interest. We just simply noting an interest rather than a conflict of interest, but noting interests on item 15 for Councillor Goff, Central City COVID-19 recovery parking charges, and for all of the appointees to our CCHL and Christchurch NZ boards for item number 16, review of councillor policy of the donation of directors' fees. The supplementary reports, I'll move that the supplementary reports be included in the agenda for the meeting. Do I have a seconder for that? Pauline Cotter. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No, that's carried. Jana Johansson, no. Public participation. Now, I have a deputation by appointment, Annabelle Turley, who is zooming in by audio-visual link this morning. And this is regarding item 16, Central City COVID-19 recovery parking charges. It is my intention to move to that item on the agenda after we've heard from Annabelle. I will note that there are no presentation of petitions, so I've dealt with item 4 as well. So, Annabelle, are you online?
Yes.
Was that a yes?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Annabelle, thank you very much for joining us in this most unusual way, and do apologise that you're not able to be here in person while we still remain at level 2. But thank you for being so understanding and to make your deputation. Thank you for your time the other day when you made yourself and other members of the Central City Business Association available to meet with myself, the Chief Executive and the Chief Executive of Christchurch NZ. That's very much appreciated. So I'll hand over to you to make your deputation in relation to the item number 15.
Okay, thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about this parking issue. Right now, the Central City is very, very fragile and it needs immediate support. Before COVID, the Central City was also fragile, and we really don't want it to go backwards. We really need to help protect the businesses in the Central City, because we don't want to see any business at all closing, especially the likes of any of our key businesses in the city, like what has been seen in Dunedin with the closure of H&J Smith. COVID has really set back retail, hospitality and entertainment in the city. All of these businesses employ a number of residents in Christchurch and support families who live in our city. Why we think that the Central City needs extra support compared to the suburbs is that since the earthquake, the suburbs actually have had a number of very good years to fall back on, whereas in the city, all the businesses are in a relative infancy, so they haven't had that luxury that the suburbs have. Also, the city, every business in the city has invested based on the public sector projects which haven't been delivered. I certainly invested on the basis of having a stadium, and I'm just one small family-owned business in the whole city. So I think that that is another reason why we need some support around this parking. We also don't have enough people living in our central city, so that makes all our businesses even more fragile compared to any other city in the country. So what we are asking for is to have the 2 hours free parking in all the car parking buildings in the city until Christmas. We see this as a way of really encouraging the residents of Christchurch to come back and enjoy the city. It gives them enough time to shop and to eat and to explore all of our wonderful businesses that we have in our city. And it also helps protect those jobs provided by those businesses. We don't see that the council can use only its parking buildings and on-street parking as an option, because this would be using the ratepayers' money in an anti-competitive manner, which could be seen as an issue with the Commerce Act. And also we think that this would actually send a really bad signal to the private investors who actually have invested in car parking buildings. So it is really, really important that it's for all central city car parking buildings, and it is for 2 hours. It's not for all day. We really appreciate that there has been some free parking, but we see that it has been taken up by people who were already coming into the city to work. I had a customer in saying this week that at 8:30 Litchfield was full. So it hasn't worked as it was intended. So for us, we would really ask for the 2 hours free parking in all the car parking buildings across the city until Christmas.
Thank you. Is that the end of your submission, Annabelle?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Tim?
Thank you very much, Annabelle. Just a question with regards to all parking buildings across the city. If the council car park buildings have 2 hours free, technically with the Commerce Commission, it's not a financial advantage because it's a cost to us, rather than in the private car parking can, at any time at all, they could have been having free car parking for 2 hours, 1 hour, they can do what they want. So what do you think the risk is under the Commerce Commission?
Well, it would be seen as being like anti-competitive.
But part of that is to have a financial advantage, but having 2 hours free in a council car park building, the first 2 hours free, isn't a financial advantage, it's actually a cost. So the true advantage is getting people into the central city to go shopping. So anyway, thank you very much.
I think that's the discussion, Annabelle, that we're going to be having around the table, is that the advice on cartel provision and Commerce Act compliance, it's variable. So you've taken a particular view of what anti-competitive means, but I think the point Tim was making was that there's nothing to stop business owners who own car park buildings from making their own decision to give 1 or 2 hours free car parking as part of their arrangements. I think what is it called? The Crossing car park still gives 1 hour free. Is that right? No, it's $2 for 2 hours. Yeah, so it is the equivalent of 1 hour free an hour. Well, it's less than 1 hour. It's about 1 hour free compared to ours. Yeah, but so $2 for 2 hours. So it's not a So I guess that's the debate, is whether it is, and the advice that we have is that it would be a breach of the Commerce Act the other way if we were to pay for the private sector car parks. But the question. This is a bigger issue which we need to take some advice on. And we would need to discuss. I think we would also have to consult publicly on it. And in terms of timing, this is a short-term decision until we get a proper parking strategy in place, which is well underway, Annabelle, I can assure you. That's something that can be looked at but not as a temporary short-term fix is the advice that we have at this stage. But Andrew, you've got a question?
Thank you. Annabelle, good morning. Thanks very much indeed for the deputation. You've made your position on the off-street parking very clear, and thank you for that. Council obviously has a number of on-street car parks in the central city as well. Do you have a view on whether what you're proposing could or should extend to those on-street car parks? I'm just interested in your views there.
We definitely don't think it needs to be free on street. We have a lot of people in Christchurch haven't got into the habit of using our car parking buildings, and we think this is a really good chance to get people in the habit of using the off-street car parking buildings, because people are used to parking on the street and driving around until they find a park. And we really want to encourage people to use the car parking buildings, to come into the city, to enjoy everything it has to offer.
Great, thank you.
James and Yanni?
Thank you very much, Annabelle. We really appreciate all the work you're doing as well, so take that from all of us. But just with respect to your deputation, I just want to try and use this as constructively as possible. What you really have been speaking to is option C in our paper, which is to extend this incentive to all operators for a period of time. On the basis, as we've heard from staff, if that were to be removed from the equation today, the reality is this is a major change of how we would deliver a service to the community. Now, I, for one, completely agree with it. I think it's a great idea. But that being said, if it was put to one side because you would have to consult on it, which would mean you'd have to go through the long-term plan process, and that's a conversation for another day. Of the other options that we have, what is the preference?
We don't see that there's any benefit in offering free on-street parking, because we do need to get the residents in the habit of using these buildings. A number of people have invested in them. So with regard to the other options, am I able to just say I'm quite strong in the option that I've within the all buildings.
Yep.
Something is better than nothing, but I don't think you need to extend it to the on-street parking.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Annabelle. Just before I go to Yanni, because it's kind of a follow-up to that, if the other car park building's paying 2 hours for $2, would that be, if we match that, would that be something that the association would consider would be a good outcome?
I think it's the perception of free parking is a massive draw card, even if it is, say, 2 hours free parking, and then after that 2 hours the prices ramp up a lot to recover that 2 hours. I think people would spend more time in the city. If it's, I'm not sure about the 2 hours for $2, because I think it hasn't been taken up as widely as I thought it would have been by our residents. I think that perception of free parking is a massive draw card.
That's incredibly helpful. Thank you very much for that. Yanni?
Thank you, Annabelle, for your submission. I just wondered if the private car parking operators that you're alluding to in your submission are members of the CCBA, and if they are or if they're not, have you approached them directly about having 2 hours free rather than council paying for it, them just doing it?
Yes, I have talked to some of them about that, and what the message was pretty clear. It shows that they've invested in these buildings, and it shows that it's not at their advantage to be doing this, and they already feel let down because the public sector haven't delivered the stadium, the Metro Sports and the convention centre, which is all things that were expected to be delivered well and truly by now.
We don't know if they're struggling or whether they could afford to do it.
I don't know if they can afford to do it or not. I have, and I can follow up and find out.
It just, certainly. I don't know the specifics, but it would seem to me that some people in the central city, like the big banks, for example, there will be people that are doing really well who would be in a position to also help with the response to what the central city needs. And I guess what I don't sense from your submission or from the report is what those others are doing to help. But that's cool.
Yeah, no, Yanni, I think that Annabelle, you might be getting the message from us that we may. I think it's the advice that we're getting is that the option C has to come off the table because of the extent of the change that it would represent. But that doesn't mean it's off the table for good. It means that it goes into that wider conversation around the parking strategy for the city, and also into the any future conversation around the long-term plan. So, which is when we engage with the community on a much more in-depth basis in relation to the details of our budgets and allocation of finances. But in terms of getting people in, the very strong message, and that's why I thought that your answer to my question was so incredibly helpful, you think that turnover is really critical as well. So you're saying that, yes, I'm getting an impression around the 2 hours, but after that, ramp up the charges because you actually want people to turn around their time in those car parks rather than stay longer than that.
Not necessarily, but I think it's a way that you can recover some of those costs by having a higher rate after the free 2 hours.
Excellent. Look, thank you very much for your time, Annabelle. I'm really appreciative, and I know all councillors are, that you've set the time aside to make the deputation this morning. I just wish it was in person, but I'll catch up with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Yeah, no, it's not for Annabelle. It's just on our process of not having her do it in person. Why is that?
We're reintroducing that at the next meeting, I think. We just have to structure the staff in terms of monitoring people coming in and allocating space within the building. It's just being super cautious while we're just getting ourselves back on our feet in terms of...
So by our next meeting we can have live deputations? I think
the next meeting will allow for on-site deputations. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It still will be limited seating in the room though. Thank you. Right, so we'll now move to item 15. Central City COVID-19 recovery parking charges, and we've got Dave Adamson, Stephen Thomas and Tim Cheeseborough at the table. And I'll just to indicate to councillors, during the just over the last few weeks, I've been first by Zoom and then meeting in person with the Central City Business Association members, and having some discussions with various business owners, not just with the association, but with various business owners about the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on their businesses, and seeking to understand some of the issues that they would like council to consider at this time. One of the ones that came up was in relation to parking, and a number of very valid points were made, which have actually really just been covered by Annabelle in her deputation, which relates to the desire to encourage people to come into the central city, but also to get used to the car park buildings, the off-street car parking. Having been someone living in the central city during the period of the lockdown, able to exercise in my backyard, it was an amazing experience to be able to wander around the central city with almost no cars around. We've got a beautiful city and fantastic street art, which you can actually see when nobody's using those temporary car parks. So it's so this staff have gone away and come up with a number of proposals. I really would like to see whether we have to take option C off the table first. So perhaps if council staff could take us through the argument around option 3 and to talk about the significance of the engagement with the Commerce Commission that would be required in order to go any further in that regard, and also obviously the point that James made, which is a very good one, an amendment to the LTP, which would trigger a special consultative procedure. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do a quick introduction before turning into the detail. We believe that the report in itself is reasonably comprehensive and covers most of the issues that have been raised. I think it's important that we are in that recovery phase. This is a short-term report. It's looking at a short-term issue, not necessarily the long-term, and we are talking about the central parking policy coming back up to you as a long discussion document, and that will have to form that bigger policy around that, because it'd be fair to say you've debated this a number of times over the last few years as various crises, or we've tried to respond to recovery. I think it's important also that we make sure that what our policy in the short term doesn't actually get any adverse, unexpected reactions, so that we need to make sure that we are delivering what we are trying to deliver and the outcomes that we've got. There's been some debate about on-street, off-street car parking. I think it's also important with the off-street car parking that council at the moment controls about 6% of the car parking in town, in the 4 avenues. If we took all the off-street parking and included the private ones, we would only be controlling around about 15%, because as the Mayor just alluded, there is a lot of off-street parking at grade, and so they have got a wide variety of other players in there, and that's where it gets very complex with the Commerce Commission, and we've had a number of discussions with the Commerce Commission regarding that, principally around the first proposal that came up, I think, to Council probably 18 months or 2 years ago. And the issue is that if you subsidise some of them and you don't subsidise all of them, you can get into a situation of being seen as a cartel. Now, the advice that we've got is that depending on how the proposal went, they may look approve that we could go ahead for providing they didn't get any complaints. However, if they got some other inquiries from our ratepayers or from other people, that may make the whole picture a lot more legally complex. So what we're saying in the short term, we believe we would need to go through all those reiterations with the Commerce Commission and actually give you an outcome that we could give you some certainty on, and we don't believe we can do that in the short term. So what we've put up here is a short term proposal, or a number of proposals. We've also given you a supplementary little paper which hopefully helps you break down the various financial components if you wanted to mix and match. So that's about all I'm going to say, and I'm going to pass either to Tim or Stefan to get into a little bit more detail.
Before you do that, I think that, thank you very much. That was an excellent summary, and particularly picking up on the option C issue. So, and it is spelt out, but I just think that you've done so extremely clearly, which is that the issue is that you can't make, there is a risk around going down a particular track, because you'd have to assume that no ratepayers would challenge the decision, and you'd have to assume that no other providers would challenge the decision, which would include Wilson's car parking. So I think that on the basis of what you have advised us, recognising that I've already had a very lengthy debate on Twitter in relation to this paper today, which has suggested that we shouldn't go down this track at all, I don't think that either from a residents basis or another provider basis that we would be risk-free in being challenged with the Commerce Commission. So I think we have to rule option C out at the beginning of this process. And so if people are generally comfortable that that is a very clear explanation from Dave about what the situation is that we face, we'll take option C off the table. And so now I'll hand back to you and you can talk about the other options that you have in front of us. So you don't have to touch on option C at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning, councillors. So the report is effectively in two parts in terms of the recommendations. The first recommendation is for Council's consideration whether it wishes to consider options around reduced fee parking on and or off street. And the paper before members this morning contains for you the various financial implications around those various options. Hopefully that's clear. If Council concludes that it does wish to consider an option to introduce some form of subsidised free parking in its own facilities on and or off street, then officers have outlined for you a number of options that you could consider, and hopefully there's enough information in the paper for you to be able to conclude which of those options you believe represents the best balance. If Council concludes that it wishes to consider an option of free parking, then office staff have recommended some resolutions there around an offer that we believe probably represents the best balance between the cost to Council, the rates impact of that measure, and also in balance with Council's strategic priorities around momentum the city needs, climate change, and so yeah, hopefully the information's fairly clear. So pretty much that's probably all we've got to say at the moment about the report.
All right. So, sorry, I've got 1,000 hands up. Sorry, sorry, I wasn't looking up. So, Jake first.
I wasn't just saying no. Hey, look, just looking at this option B, if Council were of a mind, and I think it's pretty obvious that we are to take out the on-street element of this, just looking at the first part of it, 2 hours free in our own buildings, if that was to go to 1 hour, I'm clear that the cost for that would be 300,000 over the 3 months. But in that kind of fourth column along, where it talks about a 0.3 impact on annual rates, does that include just the buildings, or is that the on-street included as well? So would it be less than that?
So through you, Madam Chair, attachment B, which you have before you, attempts to break down each of those options into the relative costs of those offers between just Council's off-street parking buildings, so that's Litchfield Street, 33 Litchfield Street and the Art Gallery, and then separately the equivalent cost of on-street. And so each of those options then sums up to an add-on of on and off street. So you're basically able to look at A1, A2, and you can even break them down within those, if that makes sense.
So am I right in thinking that there would be 0.05 impact on rates for the car park buildings at 1 hour free?
If you take rates about 5.2, 1% is about 5.2 million, so the 600,000 would be just over 0.1.
Yeah, so half that. Cool, thanks for that.
Yep. It's probably just important to stress around that is that two sets of costs are also there, and that is around just applying the offer to weekends and evenings, which we'd interpreted as perhaps more clearly targeting the hospitality, leisure and retail community and businesses, as opposed to the offer of 7 days a week. So that's why there are both weekend and all week costs in that report.
Okay, I've got Aaron, Yanni, Sarah, Mike.
Yeah, so just on the costings, the baseline for the modelling would appear to be pre-COVID numbers, because the public might go, oh no, the council's using rates at a cost of this to cover this cost, whereas if you go back 5 weeks ago, there was no one in the car parks at all, so the baseline would be zero. And but if COVID didn't exist, then the baseline would be this. So it's very hard to economically model anything at the moment. So to say that there would be a cost of this much would be based on a pre-COVID environment, correct?
Absolutely. All of the costs in the paper are obviously based upon the turnover of these parking buildings pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And that's really the only data we've got to go on, and that's why the report, if council chooses to go for one of these options, that's why the report suggests that we would report back to council in August after a short period of this to actually find out what the true costs are, because we don't know how it will affect turnover either.
So in one theory could be almost that by applying the 2 hours or 1 hour free, that you attract people to the buildings who stay longer, and we may actually make more money than we would have if we didn't do this at all and there's just hardly anyone in there because
Possibly.
the economy's tanking.
Quite possibly. If council considers it's worthwhile pursuing one of these options, then obviously council would be considering it because it is expecting to get good turnover and get good response to it. Otherwise, it hasn't worked.
Yeah. So I just find it, and I know you have to write the paper in that way that it has a cost to council, but there may be technically no cost at all, or in fact a gain. Unless we opened them next week and charged the regular full amount and then got a model for a month, we wouldn't know.
In any subsidised cost of its own parking buildings to the public, it must cost council because it's zeroed revenue, it's lost revenue.
But in an economy that doesn't exist, then, which is where that was our baseline 5 weeks ago.
Again, that's why we have based the projections on an assumption that we are returning to pre-COVID turnover and utilisation of buildings, and we're going from there as the baseline.
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron's point is a valid one, which is they're very challenging numbers for points of comparison.
Yes.
That's the point.
Yes, we accept that.
And I think you've accepted that. Yanni.
Thank you. I understand why option 3 is off the table. I totally get that. But in terms of, previously when we've been looking at parking, we've tried to take a joint up approach. So we have a lot of directional signage, for example, to private car parking buildings. I just wondered whose kind of responsibility or could talk to the private operators about not us subsidising, but actually them having a joint approach to encourage people to come back into the central city.
Yanni, that's not an issue for debate now. I've taken it off the table. So I don't want to have this paper is really clear. It is only about parking. It is not about other central city activations. There are other discussions going on with Christchurch NZ and the CCBA in that regard. So can you just leave it to this issue alone?
Right, okay.
Please.
So do we know what the capacity is around Litchfield Street in terms of what it was pre-COVID-19 versus what it is now? And also just trying to understand the impact of the hospital they're using of Litchfield Street and what possible ramifications this will have on that or otherwise.
So the capacity...
Noting that the hospital would be moving to an alternative site on mid-July.
Yeah, so the capacity hasn't changed. So the capacity of the building's still 800.
Sorry, the occupancy.
Occupancy, okay. I mean, if you took it today, it's quite full, obviously, because it's been reported it's free parking being taken up by the all-day parkers. But prior to COVID, we were sitting at occupancy around 85%. So you'll probably remember that back sort of mid last year, we had a lower all-day parking rate, and we were sitting quite full, and there's some concern about some of the retail or some of the new businesses that are opening up around, say, the riverside markets, and we increased that all-day rate, which initially dropped off our occupancy, but after that the riverside markets opened up, we hit around that 85-90% occupancy. Right. So it is very seasonal, and it dipped off a little bit for that, but that's sort of where we try to aim for, and the pricing sort of attracted that.
Okay, and I'll probably get rolled out of order, but I'll just ask it anyway and see. But do we have any sense of what the other occupancy levels were of the other private?
No, I mean, no, we don't. I mean, it's I don't
But
think
so we've got it free, and what we know is a lot of people are using our facilities, but we don't know what the use of the other private facilities is.
I don't know that. No.
Okay, cool.
No, and I think it's important to stress that some of the other facilities also have a number of early bird and leased parking schemes within those buildings. So it's important to understand that some of the other public parking buildings in the city aren't wholly public parking. Some of it has already been leased through separate arrangements with individual businesses and so on. So
I guess what I was trying to understand is how many people would leave our building and go to those private operators if we didn't have all day free parking, you know, if we come in with whatever we come in with, but we don't have any sense of.
Again, it sort of relates back to Councillor Kewen's question around, I guess, post-COVID and how that changes. And just your other part of the question was around hospital parking. And
yeah, sorry, no, I've made a mistake there. I was thinking about something else. So
okay.
I know that they're working to try and find an alternative site, but things are not confirmed as far as I know.
So it's very hard to put an exact number on the number of people parking that go to the hospital. Even the hospital don't know, because they know the number of people getting the shuttle, but they quite often arrive more than one per car. And then we don't distinguish between a hospital parker and a non-hospital parker. So, but we when we introduced that or came to that arrangement with like CHB, it was about a jump up of about 150 vehicles a day, something like that.
I think it's probably important to add that there's complete alignment with Annabelle Turley's point earlier this morning, and that is that Council's 33 Litchfield Street parking building, for instance, is the priority is very much on short stay, high turnover parking to support business and retail activity in the central city. It was never built in the first place to accommodate all day commuter parking, and so that's the issue we face at the moment with it being free, and that's why we have some problems at the moment with people parking in it all day.
Sarah.
Thank you. We've discussed the sort of the 1 hour free option quite a couple of times in the past, especially around when Litchfield opened, and we got to the point where we no longer did that. And so would it be fair to say that if it wasn't for COVID, we really wouldn't be looking at this again? It would be sort of, it wouldn't be a staff recommendation to do this.
This certainly report has been developed as a mixture between recovery from COVID to try and actually stimulate the economy of the whole of the city. So it certainly is. And that's why we've recommended up there that it's a 3-month, but we will report back to you on that. I think also, I'm not sure whether it's up there, we have actually suggested that council outside of this has conversations about other things that they may need to do to help that recovery. Is there a 6 on that? It's not actually up there, but I think there's a further one to continue those conversations around recovery. But certainly, look, the recovery of the economy is one of the drivers.
Yeah, thanks.
Mike?
Obviously, we trialled this last winter and then stopped it. Do we know what was the outcome of that once we stopped it? Did it actually decrease the amount of use in that car park, or did it stay stable?
From memory, there was an initial drop-off in terms of the number of people parking there, but it did pick up again. I mean, it is very, very seasonal, and it does.
And the revenue from car parking buildings and on-street car parks, what is that actually used for?
It's a source of income for council, so it's not ring fenced particularly.
It's not ring fenced, so it just
comes into the transport area. Yep.
It goes into the transport
area.
Melanie?
I just wanted to bring up the point that Jake asked about before, because I wasn't really very clear about the answer. So I'm asking about really the rates impact of doing this. So for option, say B2, it says that having 1 free hour in the car parking building 7 days a week is $100,000 a month. Then it also mentions about having 1 hour free on street, which is $140,000 a month. So it comes to $240 and $720 over 3 months, and that has a rates impact of 0.05%. So if council was interested in only looking at the car parking buildings, that would only come to $240,000 and would be a 0.02% rates impact. Is that correct?
The 0.05 is a monthly impact on rates. The total impact on rates would be 0.14%. If council were to remove the on-street element from that offer, then the cost of that would be just under half. So you can see the relative cost there. It's about $100,000 per month for off-street and $140,000 per month, give or take, for on-street. So the off-street cost of it would be just under half of that. But again, as Councillor Kewen was saying earlier, a lot of these numbers are obviously based upon assumptions around turnover and usage. So we are looking at about half. So the annual rates impact there is 0.14%. And it would be under half of that. So we're looking at about 0.06, I guess, if council were to choose to look at 1 hour free, short stay, 7 days a week in its own buildings.
Great, thank you.
Jimmy Chin.
Just want to continue follow this question. Confused because based on the Annabelle, the deputation earlier, she emphasized looks like the more people, patrons prefer, even business prefer the off-street the parking rather than on-street parking, but also 2 hours. But in here, the options, I mean, particular in option B, if 2 hours off-street parking per month is $200K, am I right? Per month. So 3 months is the $600K. But if no on-street parking, so total the per month $200K, that kind of the percentage of the rate impact is around the 0.1. Is 0.1? Or how much percentage?
That's correct, just over 0.1. 600.
No on-street.
No on-street.
Yeah.
So it costs you 600,000 and 1% of rates is about 5.2 million.
Okay.
So divide by, it's just over 0.1.
In that case, probably still, can meet the people's need rather than either B1 or B2, am I right? Because they mentioned would like to encourage more consumer, more customer and patrons to the CBD, but encourage off-street, council on the building rather than on-street, am I right?
Yes.
So they probably can meet their needs, fee for the purpose. Off-street, 2 hours, and also the no on-street, free.
And that's really for you to debate.
Okay,
what
yeah,
you want to make that offer.
Clarify first.
We're providing the
Clarify
information.
First. Yes. Okay, thank you.
I've got Tim and then Mike.
Thank you. I've looked at some of the other metropolitans, which are Auckland, Wellington, Dunedin, Hamilton and Tauranga, about their standard charges. But I guess for those centres, we've kind of struggled for a long time with regards to recovering from the earthquake. So we're kind of, for want of a better term, we know that this is hard. Whereas that this is all new to them. They've never had this before. So I guess for future discussion, it would be really interesting to see what they're changing to support their central cities. But it was really interesting listening to Annabelle. The one that kind of struck with me, because I think listening to the discussions, that we're losing the point. The point of this, and this is one of the questions, is to support the central city businesses. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the argument around rates is a bit of a red herring, because if we chose the option with the least rates but did the least support for businesses, there's no point in doing it. Would that be a fair statement?
I think that's a debate for you to have. We're saying to do this, this is what it will cost, and you have to recognise that there is a cost. It's lost revenue, and then basically you've got to decide whether is that a good use of ratepayers' money or whatever. So we've given you a number of options. Very, very difficult, as already discussed, to measure the effect of that. But basically, this is just an option, a variety of different options. Is that the best use of that ratepayers? You've got to recognise that lost revenue means that we need to find that money somewhere else.
But
So
also recognising that it may not, and this is the point that Aaron raised with his question, it may not represent the exact numbers lost because you don't actually know what the comparative is. And if we'd put the charges back on the buildings, for example, in the last week, we would have got a better idea than to have them completely free all day. So, you know, we're in a situation where we can't compare apples with apples. So I think we're all recognising this. So we don't know what the comparative is. But your point is made in a question. So what was your other question?
The other questions, following on, and it was really interesting hearing from the CCBA, so the closest metropolitan in line with what they're talking about is Hamilton, which is the first 2 hours free, but the third hour is $6 and therefore and on. So that's obviously trying to minimise the impact of the rates cost, but also trying to give what its true core is to support the businesses. Your comments on that?
So have you considered an option that increases the amount that are paid after
the first 2 hours?
The 1 or 2 hours free?
I think when you remember we brought up the Litchfield car park originally, we did talk to you about having different timescales. So the longer you stayed, the more you paid per hour, and certainly we've installed a system that can do that. I think that conversation is, again, part of your longer-term central city parking strategies. We've certainly got the technology to do that, and we need to talk about what sort of behaviours do we want. If we want to say to people, we want you to stay in town for only 2 hours, you know, we could certainly ramp up, or stay in our car parks for only 2 hours. We can certainly got the technology, I believe, to do that. But I think that's a larger strategic rather than the short-term issue that we're trying to look for in a 3-month solution.
Thank you.
Thank you. A question well asked and answered. Thank you. Mike?
Thank you. Do we know what the average duration of stays for the short-term stay in the parking buildings?
We believe it's around 1.5 hours.
Okay.
So
potential. So this is the issue of going between 1 hour and 2 hours. Is at least with 1 hour free, we're still going to get a bit of revenue. Thanks.
Absolutely, but it also indicates that a lot of people are staying beyond the hour. And so that is one of the tensions around 1 hour versus 2 hours, is depending on how much that parking charge influences their stay.
And our parking's per minute as well, not per half hour. We've changed it so therefore you pay for the actual time used, not actually time you don't use.
Yes.
So if the average stay was an hour and a half, technically you're only going to pay it $1.40 or something. Like a very minimal fee for that.
$1.40.
Yeah. That person that stayed an hour and a half, yes.
Yeah, that's within the building.
That would be the charge.
Not on street.
Yeah.
Chief?
Sorry. Thank you, boss. And I think this is a very fruitful debate. I think the factors we just need to think about just generally is you're trying to compare the past, pre-COVID-19, to today, where we haven't had the income coming in, to how do we deal with the imminent issue of attraction back in, and what does become the norm. So I just think that just remind yourselves of that and what it is you want to be able to achieve. That's all I ask.
I mean, one of the councillors quite rightly said questions as opposed to debate, but often in the questions you tease out what the parameters of the debate are. Mike? Yep. Well, yes, I'm happy to take a motion from the floor.
I've seen something to... Oh, it's on the screen. I just need to double check the impact on race, but I believe it.
stay at the parking building 7 days a week for the 3 month period.
So this doesn't, and this was an absent from the original resolution. It doesn't note the work that is carrying on in relation to the development of the overarching central city parking plan or strategy. I'm not sure.
No, I've just taken pretty much the wording.
Yes, I know, and to me it was an absent piece of information, because I think people, when they consider this and the decisions that we make, it's useful to have that background. So, you know, if you read this, you wouldn't understand the context. So I almost think you need an introductory statement that noting that the council is preparing and I don't know the wording of it. I'm looking to you for some help, Mike.
Central City parking policy.
Central city parking policy, noting that council is developing a central city parking policy, and noting the immediate challenge of the winter months in relation to the central city businesses, we are doing the following. So, Aaron.
Yeah, and just so people know, I will move that if this falls over, I'll be moving for 2 hours rather than...
You could move an amendment because
I'll move an amendment.
Substantive.
Yeah, I'll move an amendment.
Yeah. It's foreshadowed because it's... I mean,
but just so people know when we go to debate.
Let's be blunt. The two options are 1 hour or 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I think they're the two options. And I think if there's general agreement around the other resolutions and we need an adjustment that shows the impact of the offer on rates, so it needs to be that the alternative resolution needs to be developed, then we can have an overarching debate on the issues, and councillors can indicate, those that wish to debate it, they can indicate how they're going to, you know, they can advocate for one over the other. I mean, they are the two options, and we can then have the vote and essentially vote for all of the items, and then put the it is challenging because you've got to. You wouldn't want to end up in the situation where there was neither.
Exactly, and I'm
so
just as a point of order, and whatever is easiest I'm fine with, but would it not make more sense to have it as an amendment for 2 hours? If that fails,
well,
it's
I
then
think
1
it
hour.
is.
Because
I think you're right, and the reason I think you're right is that if people voted against the 1 hour first, and then the majority voted against the 2 hours, there would be no change. So I'm of the view that, which is what I was trying to, in thinking out loud, the best way to do that. So I will accept it as an amendment, but I haven't got a seconder for the resolution at this stage. Tim is seconding the motions for Mike.
And I'll second Aaron's amendment.
And Aaron and James Goff moved and seconded the amendment. So we have an amendment that is for 2 hours, and you need to make the adjustment to number 4 so that number 4 is accurate if the 2 hours carries. All right?
The first one, number 1 is a little bit
Yep, sorry. No, yeah, okay. Can we go back to the top? Right, okay, you've got notes the intention to develop a central city, but that's not accurate. Notes that a central city parking policy, so take out those words in between, a central city parking policy is in development and will be considered by the council before the end of the financial year?
No.
Okay. Is it going out for consultation?
Yeah, between July and August.
Okay, so notes that and a discussion document will be available for public consultation in the first quarter of the financial year, the next financial year.
And was there anticipated now, please?
Yeah, and a discussions document is anticipated to be available for public consultation. Is it in the next few months? What?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, just yeah. We'll be generic, but I just kind of want to give people the idea that there is something happening.
2020.
Yeah, for public consultation. Yeah. Okay.
Get rid of ambiguity by the council in December. Then take it back and discussion documents anticipated to be available for public consultation this year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the thing is that the consultation document's not far away. So, right, notes that a central city parking policy is in development and and is expected to be considered by council before the end of the before the end of the calendar year.
That'll
Yeah.
do it. We'll bring it earlier, but I can't give the exact date at this
Yeah.
point.
Anticipated to be considered by council by the end of the calendar year. Right. Okay. And can you take out the rest of that entire sentence? And then put another noting one, and something along the lines of agree to introduce a temporary winter central city parking arrangement for council's off-street parking buildings. In fact, you could take the two off-street parking buildings, 33 Litchfield Street and Art Gallery, you can move that up. Just move that, the end of that or copy it, just copy it. And then put it up there. Okay. Okay, and then somebody needs to work out oh, you're going to copy it, are you? And somebody will work out the amount for the second option, for the amendment. So that's an amendment.
600,000, 0.11% rates is the figures that you need if you want to go that second option.
Okay. Aaron?
So, yeah, just on number 4, the financial implications, that would be, if we, to be factually correct, if we were to leave that in, we would be suggesting that as of the 1st of June, our economy would be a pre-COVID economy.
No, it says note the cost of this offer currently estimated at.
Yes.
So
which is based on, but that's based on pre-COVID numbers.
Well,
You'd
then
have to
I'm
go,
happy that you write in estimated based on pre-COVID numbers.
well, no, I prefer it was 0 to 300.
Aaron,
'cause-
I'm not going to have a debate about how this is going to be framed. We have legal obligations under the Local Government Act.
Yeah.
I know that they don't
That's why I'm trying to be
post
accurate.
well on social media, but our legal obligations is that we have to put a legally defensible figure.
And zero
to put
to
zero on as a legally defensible figure is not possible. So I'm just saying to you that it is not something that staff can provide us with advice to support, because it cannot be zero.
Okay, well then notes that the cost of this offer currently estimated of up to, because that's saying that the...
I think just to make it clear, that is the amount that we have budgeted for income in the annual plan and the draft annual plan for that period of time.
Thank you.
So that's what we need to offset so that your books balance.
It's
so
not
whether
a
we get
perfect
that
science.
in or out, it's reasonably irrelevant. It's reasonably irrelevant because that's what the budget has got in it that you are trying to balance your books on. So that's
it's
where
not
that
going
money
to
comes
be
from.
amended. We legally have to take it into account. So you've heard from staff, that's what they've budgeted. And it doesn't matter. I mean, please, Aaron, I'm asking you to be reasonable and understanding of your legal obligations sitting around this table.
I wonder if, and I almost think you can save that for debate, because it's a placeholder and no figure that they put in will be a perfect science.
Correct.
I think we just need to accept that.
Thank you. Right. Okay, so we've got the actual motion and the amendment in front of the council, and I'm going to open it up for debate. Yanni.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask.
No, I'm opening it up for debate.
Oh, I had my hand up too. Oh, fine. Happy to debate it, but I was going to move that an additional resolution. Based on what we've heard from the Central City Business Association, I think they're looking for a consistent approach across the Central City. I take on board that there's sort of Commerce Commission issues that could have to be looked at, but it seems to me inherently, when you look at the Central City in terms of car parking, nothing would preclude us from having a joint up approach with those private operators. And I don't see why we as a council necessarily have to be the funder of everything. We know actually some of those car parking buildings are owned by some of our key partners. Ngāi Tahu, for example, has anyone talked to them? So it just seems to me that we should have a resolution in here that encourages a joint up approach across the private operators without us actually having to pay for it, which I accept is the option that's been taken off the table, but I think it would go some ways to addressing the submission that we heard. So I support the 1 hour free, and that's the reason because if we're not going to go for $2 for 2 hours, which I think some of us have previously indicated we would be supportive of, then I think the 1 hour free actually goes a long way to addressing the issue that Councillor Kewen raised, which is it's much better to get people into our building and contributing something rather than not having them come at all. And so I do tend to take the view that I think this will be positive in terms of it will probably generate additional revenue that we would otherwise lose if we don't do it. And I think keeping it to an hour is realistic. So that's where I have got to in my consideration. I would say that I think we shouldn't separate out the fact of a central city parking policy or development compared to what happens in the suburbs. And some people have talked about other councils around New Zealand, but the reality for us is we have huge suburban malls that have free car parking for people, and that is what we're competing with. And so we do have a unique situation in Christchurch, and I don't think we can divide the parking into two separate strategies. I think we need to take a holistic approach. Thank you.
Okay, Sam and Andrew.
I can be pretty brief. I'll support 2 hours. I think that's makes perfect sense at the moment in Christchurch. I have a fundamental, disagreement with this, and that I think it is inequitable, and that there are people who have poured millions and millions of dollars into building in the city, and we're effectively going to undercut them. So I think it's really good that we've signalled long-term we'll look at that. But the other thing I think that we should make a point on, and I think it's what Aaron said, is that we actually don't know what the cost of this would be, and I think we need to move away from this idea that it's a rates impact. It's actually an opportunity cost. And I think the greater opportunity is getting people into the city to spend money. And 2 hours makes far more sense in my view than 1 hour, because looking at our CBD, there's not a lot you can do in an hour. So we want them here spending money. And I think this is a pragmatic approach, at minimal cost to the council. So I hope everyone supports option for 2 hours. Thank you.
Andrew and Melanie.
Thank you. The first principal question here is whether we want to offer reduced free parking, and from what we've heard so far, it's clear that the answer to that is likely to be yes. The reasons why we would do so have been very well articulated in the deputation that we heard this morning from the Central City Business Association. We certainly understand the challenges and the history of doing business in the central city, particularly in the recent past. We also understand that a thriving central city is absolutely necessary if we're going to have a thriving city and a thriving region. And of course, all of that is amplified. All of those challenges are amplified by the COVID situation. We know that doing business in Christchurch in winter is difficult. We know that doing business in Christchurch in winter with the COVID-19 situation as well is going to be particularly difficult. And of course, the prospect of business failure is exactly the thing that we're seeking to avoid. So in my view, that leads to, we need to do something, but what we do needs to be simple, it needs to be easy to understand, and it needs to drive behaviours that over the longer term we want to encourage. In my view, that leads to option B2, as it's set out in the paper, realising that 7 days is the right thing to do. We're in an environment where not everybody works 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There are plenty of people come into the central city, and that we want to come into the central city for shopping, for entertainment, and a number of other activities during the day, as well as in the evenings at the weekends. So that for me leads to off-street only, so car park buildings only, 1 hour, 7 days a week. And that effectively balances the cost to the ratepayer, the role that we can play in creating momentum, at least having regard to climate change and behaviours, and getting people in the habit of using the council buildings rather than the on-street, supports food and beverage, supports retail, and supports other central city activities as well. So I'm very comfortable to do something, but 1 hour is where I'm going to sit on this.
Anne? Melanie?
Yeah, I will be supporting the amendment for the first hour free and council car park 7 days a week. As Annabelle said, it will increase habits of people in our parking buildings rather than parking on the street. And I'm reiterating what people have said, but I think the 7 days is important. We've already decided on it pretty much, but it does encourage shoppers coming into town during the weekdays and shopping during the daytime rather than just evenings and weekends. And I think that we should be choosing 1 hour because we'll still be able to make some revenue from our council car parks, and it has a lower effect on our rates, which this whole council is laser focused on. And as Sam said, it won't undercut the other operators as much. So I will be supporting Mike's amendment.
Leanne, can I just ask a question?
Mike has moved the motion.
Yeah.
The amendment has been moved by Aaron. So the motion is 1 hour.
The motion's 1 hour, the amendment's 2 hours.
Support Mike's motion then. It
is
said
for 2
amendment
hours.
before.
Thank
It
you.
keeps changing.
Thank you. It didn't change. That was it. Sarah?
Kira, thank you. The free parking in the central city over the last few weeks is one of the clearest demonstrations of perception not being reality. The reality is that short-term paid parking is good for businesses. It encourages turnover and shoppers are more likely to find a park near to where they're going. Also, Christchurch City Council have 6,750 on-street car parks in the central city, and there's a perception that they cost a lot. The reality is that only 1,300 of them are even metered, and 4,150 are completely unrestricted and free. Car parks are a lot like library books. The most desirable ones, the new releases or the ones close to shops, cost to hire, and the less desirable ones are free. Malls don't even provide car parking outside the shops. You drive around for a while looking for a park and you walk a couple of hundred metres to the shop you're going to, just like town. And where is the funding coming from? We are not doing this in a vacuum. We are doing our annual plan. And those asking for more free parking are also those calling for zero rates. There are indeed opportunity costs, and they are real. The rating impacts of 2 hours free for 3 months is roughly the equivalent of closing all open air and paddling pools for next summer. I'm okayish with 1 hour free in car parking buildings, but only for a very short post-COVID response time due to the impact on rates, and I fundamentally do not believe that free parking is good for business, good for ratepayers, or good for the planet.
Thank you. Aaron, Tim?
Just a couple of things, and it's good leading off from Sarah's points, because the library one was a great one about the premium books you pay a charge and the other less desirable ones are free. It'd be great if they were free, because then our library budget wouldn't be so massive, but the reality is each of those books that go out cost around $6 each, so they are subsidised, just like you could say this parking is subsidised. This parking is a loss leader. We don't know the economic environment we're in, but I'll give everyone a quick business lesson. There's a reason why those massive shopping malls all throughout the suburbs have free parking. If charging people to park was good for business, they would do it. They would make a fortune, but they don't, because that's not what attracts people to go shopping at their premises. And Sarah's right, having the free-for-all didn't work, because you get people who work in town abusing it, so that makes no sense. 2 hours will get people to town and opening up their wallets a lot more than 1 hour free, and Annabelle's point about getting people used to using parking buildings is a good chance for us to get people used to that practice, because we don't want them parking on street as much, but we want them in town for as long as possible, because there's more chance of them spending money. And just on that, if a parking subsidy is about bringing people into the inner city in numbers, as we go forward and we review any form of subsidy in the future, something using a smart parking in a building might be is the more people that are in your car, like for every extra person you get an hour free, which encourages you to bring as many people as you can to town. Things like that might be a way forward, because it's moving lots of people to a destination.
Thank you. I find the mall argument really interesting, because malls are only responsible for the land they're on. The council, the ratepayers, have to pick up the cost of all that traffic movement affecting and damaging the road to the malls. They affect and damage the horizontal infrastructure, both above and underground. So we have a whole lot of costs which the malls don't. When the malls are built, they calculate all that, and believe me, it's not cheap to have a place in a mall. So they're doing pretty well, and it's at the expense of ratepayers, although ratepayers go to the malls. When it comes to this argument, the principle of it is about supporting the central city businesses for a short period of time over a very hard time. So when you argue the rates versus what is optimal for what we're trying to achieve here, there is a balance. And I've discovered today that if you're trying to cut your rates or support zero rates, when it's savings, it's obviously cutting rates, but when it's not cutting rates and you are supportive of it and adding to rates, it's an opportunity. So I'll remember that one. Opportunity costs. Thank you. I do think that we do have to have a balance. I think the 1 hour free is a very good balance to this, to the businesses, but also to the ratepayers. If you look at if you stayed in town for 2 hours with the first hour free, it would be the cheapest parking out of the 7 largest metropolitan centres in New Zealand at $1.40 an hour. I think it encourages people to use our parking buildings. Private buildings can do what they want when they want. Many of those that have invested in them are the principals of associated commercial areas. So there is a different and an outcome for them. So I do think that these arguments are in a sense baseless, because we've got to look at the principle and the balance. The principle is to support the central city businesses over a short period of time, which I believe this does, but it balances, and we must always look at the cost to the ratepayers, and especially now. I think this first hour free reaches that balance, achieves everything we need, but it is essential for the future to have an overall plan for this and for our central city parking. So I'm very pleased to second this. Thank you.
Thank you. Jimmy?
Thank you. Yeah. I echo the term, the debate, because while in response to this, the COVID-19 crisis, the council like to take into account, to help those smaller, the kind of retailer, business, also attracted the people to town. But based on staff, the information, only the off-street parking, only 6% council on off-street the building. It's not 100%, but council take into account, would like to, to help those the business. So I think probably the 1 hour is reasonable, because while we still need to consider this more or less the kind of the rates, the impact, and also the we review, all those operation costs, etc. But this one is not reduced, but it still impact all the rates. We need to consider the balance. Even a moment, we are all aware, private those car parking area, if the same as our 1 hour free by the bridge or the not compliant with the Commerce Commission, but I'm not sure how to mitigate all this effect. I do believe all those private owners, they also like to attract their patrons or their kind of consumers to visit their shop, etc. So I think we still need to consider the principle and balance. Probably 1 hour is the more reasonable to cover all kind of factors. Thank you.
James?
Thanks. I'll just for clarity's sake, I'll just make this very clear again. The substantive is 1 hour, the amendment is 2 hours, so your first vote will be the amendment on whether or not you want 2 hours, and when we go to that vote, I will be voting in favour of the amendment, which is to support 2 hours, for this reason. Why are we doing this? Why are we considering this? We're doing this to support our local central city businesses who are struggling in the wake of COVID-19. The central city is different from the suburbs. Unlike malls, who enjoy great success largely as a direct result of the earthquake, everything in the central city had to start from square one. They're basically a start-up. The foregone revenue that's identified in the report, I don't actually think is a bankable figure, and I think staff themselves will agree to that, because it presupposes that demand will not increase when cost decreases. So a number is put in there, it's very binary, and it's just done as a placeholder because we have to do it. But do know that as you decrease price or offer incentives, demand increases. It has a very real effect. That's why loss leaders exist. It's just economics. If the average stay of a car park, if the average stay of a paid car parker in the central city currently with paid parking is 1.5 hours, watch that increase when we offer 2 hours free. Watch that spend go up with the added time that they're in there. Watch those businesses who desperately need the support get that benefit from it. So the 2 hour option is critical because it matches the malls. The malls offer 2 hours free. This would simply and temporarily put us on an even keel with the malls. So why are we doing this? Because we want to support these struggling local central city businesses. The CCBA, the collective voice for those struggling central city businesses, have told us this morning that the 2 hours free makes the difference. That is what they are crying out for. That is what they have asked for. That is their strong preference. That's what they've told us. These businesses are struggling. These businesses need our help. And I support the amendment of 2 hours free over 1 hour free because the very people that we're trying to help have been the ones that have directly told us that this morning.
Is there anyone else before I come back to Mike? James?
Kia ora. On the back of James Goff, I support those comments and note though that the CCBA also asked for the 2 hours free across all car parks. We know that the Commerce Act prevents us from doing that. That's why we won't be even considering it, but it is something to consider if we had to do this again. So this is in all off-street car parks, of course. But what I'd like to know is or note is that it's important that we record and report back on the effect that this has, because we should be able to do that, because I support this amendment of 2 hours actually, but I do want to see what effect it has at the end of it all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Because I want to say a couple of words just before Mike does. Thank you. Look, just to pick up on a number of issues, one, I want to thank and acknowledge the Central City Business Association, Annabelle, for making her deputation this morning, but also making time available to talk to us about what the real needs are of the city at this time. We are in unprecedented times, but we have dealt with various challenges before. These ways of dealing with things, they're never ideal, because they're literally temporary solutions. They're band-aid solutions, looking for an option to help people recover in the best way that we possibly can provide support at the moment. People have made comments around the significant private sector investments that have led the way in the Central City. The Central City investments that we're talking about were made on the basis of a commitment to a blueprint that was designed by central government and promised to our city. A cost-sharing agreement was entered into with a council that I didn't lead. It was another council. That's how long ago it was. It was in 2013 that promise was signed off by council, and council said that they would commit to it regardless of the outcome of the insurance negotiations. So even without an insurance settlement, we will sign up to this. Now, personally, I think that is madness, to sign up to a whole lot of things without having the money in the bank, as it were, or financially affordable, or any indication of that. But that was the promise that was made, and people made commitments. The private sector, instead of waiting for the public sector to lead the way, which was the promise of the blueprint, they invested ahead of it. We've got an obligation as a city to make sure that they survive. They have made the investments, they've committed to our city, and we need to help them out. Malls don't offer free parking. The businesses pay for it. I mean, I don't know what sort of economic class that somebody went to that thinks it's free. Nothing is for free. Somebody pays, and in this instance, it is paid for by the businesses that rent stores in those malls. I have watched businesses go out of businesses, little stall holders in those malls, absolutely challenged by unreasonable agreements that they are forced to sign if they want to be where the people are. We need the people to be in the Central City, and I agree with James, I agree with Annabelle, that to bring people in for just 1 hour at this stage, I think the attraction of the 2 hours is because we've got the COVID-19 situation, we've got social distancing, we've got people having to book times in restaurants. Restaurants can't be full. So I think it's really important that we take that into account. I recognise that it's difficult to set a baseline figure. The council staff have to work on what their budget says, but you know, the baseline isn't necessarily the baseline, because we don't really know what the post-COVID-19 situation would be, and the whole question about paying for the third-party ones. If you really think that the people that have been tweeting against me making this decision today won't take us to court over a decision, or won't make a complaint to the Commerce Commission, or some of the at-grade car parking won't take us to the Commerce Commission, well, welcome to the real world, people, because exactly that is where we'll end up. So I think it's important that we get the strategy in place, the parking policy in place that Mike and the team are working on so hard. That is the key, but this is a temporary, short-term band-aid, and I plead with councillors. I understand that people sometimes get their minds fixed on a single answer, but sometimes these things are more complex than that, and so I ask you to consider the 2 hours free. Mike.
Thank you. Look, no matter how you spin it,
this is going to impact rates, whether it's 1 hour free or 2 hour free. And obviously, the more hours you make free, the bigger the impact is going to be. And it's slightly ironic that the councillors that are pushing for 0% are the ones that want to have the bigger impact on rates. Look, I agree. This is we're going into a post-COVID world, and there are people struggling, and we do need to do something. This is not about winter. This is actually about trying to do the right thing coming out of COVID. So therefore, I'm happy with actually where we are with offering 1 hour free car parking. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that 2 hours will actually give you more benefit than 1 hour for the council. We get revenue. This goes into our transport network and will help some of the road smoothing that we need to do. We know actually that our streets we receive the most complaints on, and we're just going to throw away revenue because of something we have no evidence about. So I'm happy, and I'll be supporting the resolutions that I put forward to provide 1 hour free parking. It's what we did prior to the earthquakes, and it's actually what people liked. It's 7 days a week, and it's our 2 council parking buildings, which we only have 900 car parking spaces of off-street car parking out of 10,000. You know, we don't have many. We're doing our bit. If people want to keep debating this, maybe we should be asking the question whether we should even have a car parking building, or we should put it all into the private sector. But look, I think we've come to a really good position. I really hope people do not support a rates increase with 2 hours and actually go for a pragmatic solution of 1 hour, what actually acknowledges actually the current environment and actually the revenue that we do get from car parking buildings.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask staff to do the roll call on the amendment because I think that's probably the easiest way.
Which is for 2 hours.
That's for 2 hours. So for those people who want the 2 hours, I'm just going to take the vote now. So why are people putting up their hands?
Can I foreshadow my amendment?
No, you haven't moved an amendment, Yanni. So
just as we do it, can we put 5 separately, please? Yeah, but when we do the vote, if we can have 5 separate things.
We're just doing the amendment at this stage. Okay. So I'm going to ask staff to do a roll call on the amendment. Yes.
Yes.
Now, I'm assuming, Aaron, that you just wish to have your vote recorded against number 5. Thank you. So I'll put the motion as it stands, noting that Aaron records his vote against the noting part of the motion, item 5. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Oh, sorry.
Just not away from that for obvious reasons.
No.
I wanted to.
Sorry, no, I'm voting for 1 hour. I'm not going to, so I just assumed that everyone would vote for 1 hour. That's why I put it the other way round.
All right, we'll just go with it. That's fine.
No, but who wants to have their vote against it?
No, I won't.
Recorded. So Sam McDonald against the 1 hour and Catherine Chu against the 1 hour. Anyone else?
Neither here nor there now.
No, just the 2. Thank you. Right, well, that's carried. Thank you very much. And it's 11:31. Yeah, I'm just thinking that maybe we should do the COVID update paper, because otherwise, I mean, we probably need a relatively short, gentle paper before we do directors' fees. Right. Mary, come and be gentle at the table.
This is your respite, Kat.
This is our respite moment.
Great.
So it'll be very quick today, Mayor and Councillors. So just wanted to give a quick update about where we are in terms of the COVID response. Excuse me. First, just to let you know that our EOC is now moving to the monitoring stage. Sorry, I've got something in my throat. That will start over the next week with the aim that we will have closed the EOC down by the 12th of June. We're waiting advice from the National Crisis Management Centre about how to handle the 0800 number after that EOC closes down and what the intentions are. We are still, as a council, receiving between about 5 and 20 calls a day into that 0800 number. So I want to know potentially where those calls should now be diverted to, or whether we need to continue on with that. We will maintain in the EOC a monitoring on-call team ready to stand up if there's a second wave, and Health is doing a similar step, is that they are establishing a team and processes if there's a second wave at the moment. So at the moment we're not anticipating that, but we are ready if we need to. In terms of the council activity, most of our council activity is continuing as usual. We are transitioning more people back into the office over the next week after Queen's birthday, but still maintaining that the protocols around hygiene and good practice. So that's probably the update. Did also just want to, at the last briefing, the council asked for an update on service levels, service requests that were met during the lockdown. I think it was Councillor Johansson that had particularly asked for this. Just wanted to report in that during the lockdown period we received 12,500 service requests. 83% of those were completed during the lockdown. So, with the vast majority of those completed within the time frame, the service level agreement time frame. Of the less than 20% that are still being resolved, half of them are within the still within the service level agreement. So I managed to maintain a large number of closures during the lockdown period. The bulk of the requests were about wheelie bins, through waters and transport. So through waters and transport is our normal areas that we get most requests from. So that's it from me, apart from just to let you know there are 2 national plans that are currently being developed, which we were only made aware of yesterday and today. One is our caring for communities plan going forward in COVID, and that's being led by MSD, and then also Health is leading a plan which is out for consultation at the moment around psychosocial and mental well-being recovery. So we will be having input into both of those, and we'll bring those back to council for approval. Great, that's it.
Do I have any questions? Anne?
Thanks, Mary, for the superb job again that you've continued to do on our behalf. The huge demand, I suppose, for the 0800 number. You've said that you're looking at different options in terms of how to continue that. Can you give us some ideas that what going forward? What that could look like?
So the calls for the 0800 number are dropping. So there's not a huge demand. So it varies between 1 to sort of about 20, but some days there's only 1 call a day. We're looking for some indication from Wellington, the National Centre, about where those calls should go to, because they're not traditional local government calls. They are calls largely for food parcels, and so we need some indication from them, one, whether they're going to continue to fund that food parcel, but also where the call who should be taking the calls now, rather than them coming through council.
Yanni?
Thanks, Mary, and thanks for the work that you're doing. I know you've kind of touched on it briefly previously around community sport. Is there any update you want to just share with us in terms of what's happening with the community sport coming back?
We're talking to Sports Cadbury and intending to have them in for a briefing. So that's probably where you get the good picture of it. A briefing of council for full council about what the sports codes are planning and what resourcing they are getting in from from a national level and their whole objective. So rather than try to touch on that now, could we hold that for the briefing?
I think a briefing would be really good, and I just wondered whether that could include a bit of thought into the psychosocial impact of enabling people to play sport, and I just don't know what our funding implications will be, but I suspect there may be some issues around affordability. So if that could be aligned to the briefing, I think that would be quite useful.
Yes, so the briefing will definitely include that because you'll be aware that there's a national funding package to support, so they'll be able to brief on where that's targeted.
Jimmy?
Thank you. My question is, at the moment, still in alert level 2. However, the council will open all of the community facility. I'm particularly concerned, probably from alert level 2 to level 1 still need to go another 4 weeks, etc. So how the council staff to monitor those enforcement of those social distancing, because now you have up to 100 people can use those facilities, where most of the staff at the moment still stay at home to work. So how to monitor this enforcement to prevent from those community transmission happen again. This is my particular concern. Yes.
So as you'll be aware, all our community facilities are open again. Yes. The numbers aren't as high as normal, but they are growing, and we're expecting them to continue to grow. We before we opened had a contact tracing package in place, so we've been able to contact trace all the people that are coming and going. We actually have rearranged classes and rearranged equipment to make sure that there's social distancing, and there's staff in those facilities to make sure that people adhere to the social distancing. So all our facilities is very good practice in terms of the public coming in and the public interacting with each other. Same with our facilities in service centres and downstairs with the counters being open now, good contact tracing in place and good social distancing. You'll see in many of them we have the perspex screens up to avoid that spread and that contact with the public and between staff and public. In this building where staff are coming in, they are maintaining that shorter distance of social distancing, which is allowable in a workplace, but we've also got other things in place of keeping people on the floor they're working in and not moving across the building. So, and some areas are having split shifts coming in to stop that contact. So we're sort of got good practices in adhering to all the guidance. One of the things I think that everyone will be aware of is at the moment there is no indication that there's community transmission at all. And so I know that they'll be doing 2 of the cycles, so two weeks of clearance is what Health was talking about yesterday. But the risk is small at the moment, but we are maintaining good practice just in case.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? No? Would someone like to move that the report be received? Melanie Coker, seconded by Jimmy Chen. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you, and thank you, Mary, to you and your team for an excellent job. Thank you. All right, well, we'll move on to the review of council policy for the donation of directors' fees, which is item number 16 on the agenda. Well, I'm happy that if people want to just quickly grab a coffee, maybe if you could be back here at 11:41 at 10 to 12. All right, so we'll just adjourn for 10 minutes. Thank you. We're dealing with item 16, review of council policy for the donation of directors' fees, and we are noting for the record that a number of councillors sit as councillor directors. I asked the council as an organisation to look back at when this policy was introduced. It was introduced in 2017. And I in fact moved it, and Andrew seconded it. So it was none of them were declared as conflicts, because of course the interests that we hold as directors don't impact on a policy that could apply to any councillor that's appointed to any director position. At my request, we're just changing the focus of this paper to the CCHL and the Christchurch NZ directors' fees at this stage, because they are the directors' fees that have not been paid to members, because the assumption was that the policy would continue, and the assumption was that we would then, by the end of the financial year, determine where those fees would be allocated. At a councillor workshop earlier on this year, back in March, there was a discussion amongst councillors who said they'd like to reconsider the fees policy prior to making the decisions on recipients of the donations. So that's why the paper has been determined, and the reason that it came before the agenda relatively late was that the paper's been prepared for some time now, but the reality is that councillors wanted to have it on the agenda prior to making the draft annual plan decision, which is tomorrow. So that's the sequence of events and why we are considering this today. So there are two issues that we have on the table. One is that is whether we agree that the two organisations, Christchurch NZ and Christchurch City Holdings Limited, should, rather than pay directors' fees to councillor directors, pay an equivalent amount to alternative bodies and to the recipients of the fund. In the past, that has been the Innovation and Sustainability Fund and the Mayor's Welfare Fund, and on occasions to Imagination Station to stop it from falling over. So those have been the decisions of the council in the past. And so there are two separate decisions. The one decision, do we agree with that policy going forward? And the second decision is where we want the money to be directed. And I am going to ask a couple of questions in relation to that. I guess that the question of the policy itself is a precursor to the decision around where the fees would be directed, and so we should deal with them as two separate issues in my view. So the first issue is that we agree to one of the following policy options. So I'm going to open this one up first: to retain the current policy for fees to be donated. That's not quite right. It's for a councillor director fee equivalent to be donated, and the second one, or adjust the current policy, or to be donated it needs to be quite explicit. It needs to say that we retain the current policy that instead of paying directors' fees for councillors, sorry, I do apologise. I didn't see this paper ahead of it going on the agenda, so the wording is incorrect. So we'll work on the wording, but essentially we're going to agree for a policy option for the treatment of fees earned by councillors. So we're not considering council employee directors. Councillor employee directors do not get paid fees, so that there is no question of any fees being paid, and there is no question of any alternative. So it's the treatment of. So it's an. Yeah, there are two issues. One, yeah. I do apologise because I hadn't. I'm going to step away from the table. I'm going to ask Andrew to chair another item on the agenda, and I'm going to rewrite this.
When we do that,
this
Leanne,
one.
Can we get some clarity around, directors who actually potentially this policy could change whether they receive money or not? So I think there's it'd be really good to get some public advice.
We have got that advice.
Well,
Thank you.
It'd be good to hear it.
Yep. You've just heard it. There is no conflict of interest.
From
We're
staff.
determining the policy, but I'll leave that I'll leave that to Ian for when he comes back. Could you chair another couple of items?
All right, so we'll leave this one until we've got the further information. So Peter Ryan apparently is here if we wanted to turn to item 6. The update on the residence survey. So let's do that. So let's move to number 6. Peter, welcome to the table. Thank you for joining us. I'm guessing that you want to start with an introduction or a bit of an overview, and then we'll move to some questions.
For sure. Good morning.
Thank you.
Okay. This is the annual residence survey for the year March 2019 to 2020. There are 2 parts to the survey. To sum up what the survey is about, it's not about a person or even the council as an entity. It's about the services we offer. So it isn't about reputational issues or any of those things. There are 2 parts. The general satisfaction survey looks at things that everybody in the city can access and does access, like roads. The second part is on specific things like getting a building consent, visiting a library, and that's where we have people actually contact those people as they're experiencing the service to say, how was that, what worked, was it responsive, that kind of thing. The survey's been running for about 20 years in its current form, longer in an earlier form. It's the biggest and probably the longest running set of feedback we have on the residents of Christchurch. It also forms the basis of some of our level of service measures in the long-term plan and our performance measures. The bottom line of the most recent feedback is that overall satisfaction with council services has declined from 62 to 50%. Underneath that is basically a rise in the number of people who consider themselves neutral or having no view. So this presentation will go into the highlights and lowlights of what's behind those numbers. Basically, of those who said they were dissatisfied, 39% they were unhappy with the services provided, and 21 gave lack of responsiveness as the driver behind their vote. The things that council performed the best over the last year were consistent with previous years. So waste management, people love the bins. Libraries, parks and reserves, events and activities, and recreation and sports centres. Water supply, somewhat confusingly, turns up in both the positives and the negatives, and that might reflect places where chlorine has been removed versus places where it hasn't. I'm speaking at a very high level here. There's oceans of data under this. There's tens of thousands of data points. I would normally have Kath Jameson, who's the technical expert on surveys, with us to answer any of the more detailed questions. She's unwell today, so I'm going to try to handle both. Those areas needing most improvement, roading was the standout by a country mile. It's consistent with previous years. That has been a long-standing message about the quality of roading. I'll go into the details of what's under that shortly. Parking, footpaths, waste management, council decision-making and financial management are the areas for greatest improvement. Now, none of this has an immediate legal or financial implication, but there's been a clear drive from councillors in the earlier briefings on this to use this information both in the annual plan and as the foundation for thinking in the long-term plan. So there's no legal obligation here, but it's a very clear message from the community, and that should form a lot of the thinking in both of those plans. Just moving through into a little bit of the detail now. Excuse me. I'm moving to the overall satisfaction graph, which shows the trends over time. Interestingly, while I don't have the detail, Auckland's information has also survey information has also come out, and while it's not exactly apples for apples in the way they do their questions, it shows a similar downward trend as well. It's probably premature to say it's a nationwide trend, but there's certainly a widespread view that these results are going down over time across the board. It may have to do with people's expectations across the country, but putting that aside, the trend line from 2010 is clearly downwards. Now, that may be a coincidence. That also marks the beginning of the earthquake sequence, and the whole confusion and turmoil arising from that. The clear thing for me looking at that graph is that neutral responses jumped from 11% in 2016 to 27% today. So they've more than doubled in just a couple of years. So I don't know, you might want to call that the meh factor, but that's a clear signal there. Maybe people are consulted out, I don't know. But the answer, I don't know, or I don't have a particular view, has really gone up at the expense of a positive feedback. Just moving through to best improvement aspects. Areas the council delivers best, I went through them earlier: bins, libraries, parks. None of those are surprising. They're things we've historically been strong at, and the proportion there gives you some sense of highlights. Water supply historically was a little higher. It's always been a highlight. People love the water, but it's dropped a little bit on that scale, and equally has turned up in the areas for improvement, and that's almost certainly to do with chlorination. Moving through to the areas that need most improvement, you can see the really clear message there about roading. Underneath that, I'll just jump forward. What lies beneath that result, the key point is make smooth, remove potholes. There is absolutely no surprise there, and that is 100% consistent with the message from previous years. There's also some points about better quality repairs, less frequent repairs, faster repairs. So this is a good example of the message that's come through loud and clear from the whole survey, which is better core services, more responsive. That, if you wanted to sum up 57,000 data points, they sum up as better core services, more responsive services. Roading is the example there. Water supply, I think I've spoken about earlier. Remove chlorine and other additives was the highest driver behind that. And then quality, smell and taste, which is probably also associated with chlorine. Then you go down into very small bits of data. As I said, I'm moving through these at a high level. I mean, if we did the line by line, it would take days. So, but we are very happy to address specific or detailed or technical concerns. Just contact me at any point and Kath can come back to you on those. Just moving through the other areas to address. Parking, more parking, better quality parking was the standout there. Financial management is complex because there's a whole bunch of things there. It's not just financials, it's decision making, transparency and understanding how those decisions work. The standout in that area is fuzzy. A better rates system is the standout. What exactly that means, I think you'd have to go into the verbatim comments. Underneath this bare shell of statistics are all the open-ended feedback comments from the ratepayers. So you can actually, if you want to drill into that, you can see what they meant by those numbers. Expenditure on unnecessary projects, and then down into sort of a smaller cut of rats and mice responses. That's probably the most blurry of the responses because it's a blurry subject, both decision making and financials together. However, it's a much smaller component of what they're dissatisfied with. Now, those individual service results go back to inform your performance reporting, and the annual report. They're part of the suite of performance measures, which are, in summary, generally things around quantity, quality, efficiency, responsiveness, and then lastly, perception, which comes from here. Following that, there are a couple of tables that give you the breakdown of the individual pieces of feedback, how they went as a performance measure, the trend over time, and the last 3 or 4 years worth of results, so you can see how they've been performing. Some of these are extraordinarily high, some of them are not. It's a real mixed bag, but it is consistent with the previous mixed bags. Now, there has been a lot of discussion in the briefings prior to this paper coming up. This is obviously step one in a much longer process around addressing what do we do. This is, I guess, to be frank, the take it on the chin moment. We've had a message. It's clear. The numbers are the numbers. It's about now the actions we take to address them, and specifically how we translate that into annual plan and LTP decisions.
Great, thank you, Peter. So now let's move to questions, but bearing in mind that we've had a briefing on this. The purpose of this is, as Peter says, the facts are the facts, so this is the opportunity to influence our decision-making and priorities in the annual plan, in the long-term plan, and Peter's already also made the offer that if we wanted to drill down into any detail, he's very happy to do that, but I'd like to keep any questions at a reasonably high level for the purpose of this discussion, realising that those opportunities have been had and continue to exist. So, Pauline.
Thank you. It's just on the targets not met in that last table you pointed out, and I'm just wondering, Peter, we've got the curbside collection, both the red and the yellow bins, target not met. How do we explain that? Because you put your bin out, it gets emptied, and take it back in. How can we fail to meet that target? What on earth would people be dissatisfied with? I'm just struggling with that one.
I can't give you the exact facts and verbatims off the top of my head. It can be things like if the recycling is contaminated, it wasn't picked up, would be another one. We'd have to go into...
Couldn't be dissatisfied with us for that. Yes, of course it's our fault. Sorry. Yeah. No, sorry, keep going.
Look, I think that's one where, to be fair on the science, I should go back and find out what the verbatims underneath are, rather than speculate on what the number means.
It's interesting, yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. And if any answers that need to be circulated afterwards, Peter, can be circulated to everybody, that would be great. Sure. Thank you. Anne.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you can answer this either, but so you've used phone, email and face-to-face interactions to gain residents' feedback.
Yes.
How do we guarantee that we are capturing a wider audience? Because there are some people who can't, read English very well, and there are others who haven't got access to email. How do we ensure that we're getting a diverse range of people feeding back?
Fair question. I wish Kath were here for the detail, but overall, the spread of the survey is designed to cover both all the geographic areas of the city, but also all the demographics of the city. Now, I hear what you're saying about the technology. In the case of the point of contact, the technology is irrelevant. We actually use university graduates on their holidays, because they're nice and cheap for one thing, to basically go up to people with a clipboard and talk to them. So technology is not a barrier for that side of it. For the telephone side, I guess language would be the only barrier there, and Kath would be able to talk about how they deal with the language issue there, because the questions are complex. The survey 2 years ago was clocked at running something like 27 minutes, which is about as long as any human being will do a survey for. In fact, it's getting harder and harder to find people who will participate across the breadth of local government services. It simply drives a large survey. But look, the bottom line is geographics and demographics are covered. Your technology question could only apply to the non-contact survey, and Kath will be able to answer the detail on how they methodologically approach that. I can't answer that.
Okay, thank you. It would be good to know if organisations exploring other ways, for example, Facebook polls or you know, even Instagram, to just actually get information back from people quickly.
A lot of the other surveys
There have
use...
been examples of that recently, Sam, haven't there?
Yeah.
Successful. But it would be good to know that those sorts of things were happening going forward to capture those audiences.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Jimmy.
Okay, thank you. My question a little bit similar like the N, you know, because we review 1.8, those overall satisfaction in 2019 to 20, the satisfaction dropped from 62 to 50. But I just want to know regarding to the methodology of survey, you know, whether it's exactly the same as previous year. If you emphasize, you know, you separate two different category of survey. One is a general purpose one. The other one is point of contact survey one.
Yeah.
So I just want to know, because general purpose you focus on, that's a random, you know, that's representative sample. But the point of contact one you emphasize is kind of the face-to-face, etc. Email, whether still random, wide range, or
no, the
methodology is my concern.
The methodology is the same. Both surveys have been run for a lot of years as separate surveys, so the recipe is the same.
Yeah, it's the same, whether we can see the white drop of 12%.
I'm sorry?
Because we dropped the certification reduced from 62 to 50.
Yes, but that drop is achieved using the same recipe as previous years, which is a mixture of the point of contact and general satisfaction surveys, which have always been run separately. So it's the same calculation method. I think we have to just take it on the chin that that's. However, we might look at the methodology. It's the same one, and if the results change, it's not the methodology. It's been consistent. The people are telling us something different.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Any further questions? Yanni.
Thanks. Just three questions. One is, I'm just trying to understand what we're doing in terms of responsiveness. And I know one of the councillors and myself have raised the issue of we still seem to have a language problem when we get people's requests for service, where we tell them the job's been completed even though it hasn't. So I just really wanted to get some sense of what steps we can take as an interim measure to kind of address that frustration. The second question was, there was a hugely positive satisfaction with, I think, the bus exchange and the Riccarton Suburban Bus Lounge. And I was just wondering what that information, where that information goes in terms of, you know, looking forward. And the third question was, although we've got the very high level, are we able to get some geospatial reference to where the concerns are coming from, so we can kind of see the hotspots on a map, if you like, which would probably give us a little bit of a better picture in terms of where investment could be directed. Thank you.
Okay, so just taking those sort of almost in reverse order, the geospatial one, I think we discussed at the briefing that the data is already there by ward, but the team is going to do a breakdown by a board view, if you like. So, yes, the geospatial breakdown is absolutely achievable. The questions on the transport stuff on the bus exchange, I believe, were part of the...
Well, that one. So at some stage, for example, when we get the resident survey, would we be able to see, I don't know, if there'd been 10 complaints in a street or a little area unit of potholes or roads, we could go, cool, there's some streets there that are generating a lot of complaints,
okay,
and therefore we'll bring a project forward to fix it.
All right, that's a little bit different to breaking down the resident survey. That's actually the request for service data broken down by geographic area.
Yeah.
My team can't do that, but we can talk to the team that does. I thought your question was about breaking down the resident survey.
Well, it was to try and align the mechanisms of complaint to identify where we prioritise in terms of the frustration that people are going through.
I'm not sure what that would look like. I'm not sure how you'd overlay the resident survey with requests for service on a map.
Okay.
Yeah, As you get down to suburb or street, the sample size becomes invalid.
Right. Okay.
So,
Yeah, and that's certainly what we've heard before in response to similar questions. So let's move on to the next question, Yanni. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Let's move on to the next question.
Okay. So the second one was about the bus exchange. That data, I think, came from the transport survey and has been fed back to the transport team to address in their activity plan for the LTP. So that becomes one of the many inputs into how they set out their plan and budget for the long-term plan. And if you could refresh me on the first question.
So it was just there seems to be an issue with our marketing and comms, and then also our responsiveness around things like CSRs. And I know another council has also raised this issue that I've raised, is even the language we're using when people are logging complaints comes back and says, thanks for your job, it's been completed, or it's in the system to be processed. And it's kind of, people get a bit frustrated. So I just wondered what intermediate steps we can take to be more responsive to people when they're contacting us to get things done. And I was also, related to that, of course, was the criticism of our marketing and comms.
Okay. Yeah. Look, this is a complex answer, but it's a complex question. You can do things in the short term, in the interim, about trying to speed up requests for service. But ultimately, responsiveness comes down to what we've paid for. And what we pay for, in a lot of these cases, is contracts. And those contracts have response speeds in them. What we need to make sure in the long-term plan and going forward is that when councillors set a level of service on how fast we respond to something or how quickly we want it repaired or to what standard, that they understand that when they set the LTP and the contracts reflect it. In other words, we need to move away from the model of the LTP says you'll get what's in the contract, but the contract's off the page, you can't see it, it might be locked in concrete. And you can speed up and promise as much as you like. The contractor has a standard that he's got in a contract and he's paid for. So the long game is about making sure that contracts align with what council wants to do, rather than council gets what's in the contract.
Thank you.
That's the brutal, plain English answer of it.
Good. Yeah. Look forward to it.
Great, thank you. James Daniels.
Kia ora, Peter. Thank you for your report. I just missed at the beginning, you said something about it's not the fault of the organisation, it's the something.
Sorry, I didn't say fault. I said the survey is not a Gallup poll of a particular person or CCC's reputation. It's about the services it delivers. So I just wanted to be specific about what's being surveyed, and it's the menu of services, not the mayor, the CE, the reputation of the organisation. It's none of those things.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that clarification. I wasn't ready to write it down. That's why I couldn't remember it, obviously. So, but the survey does reflect on the reputation of the organisation as a whole, doesn't it?
Yes, of course it does.
Yeah.
I was really trying to say that it's not a how successful is our image kind of survey. It's based around our services. But yes, it does affect our reputation.
Yeah. How do we do that, and how? Do we reflect on that? And
we've never been budgeted or asked to run a survey on outside the services we deliver.
Yeah.
This one, as you can see, is really quite full, and it sounds like that would be a more specialised, bespoke kind of view of the world. You need to get the questions right. Lots of organisations do this. What's our image? Is it going up or down? But that's not what this survey is.
Yeah. No.
So if we wanted to do that, we'd need to scope it very carefully so that there was agreement about what we're trying to achieve, and we need to resource it somewhere.
Okay.
But
thanks.
there's certainly no unwillingness to run these kinds of surveys. Okay. It's the power of knowing,
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Now, I know Dawn wanted to make some comments before we move on. Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd give some reflections. Having joined in middle of October, and our survey goes out in January. So the first thing I would say is this is a goldmine of information, and we need to treat it in that way. I think the reality of connecting what is coming out, not just out of the resident survey, but our customer service centre, all our other surveys that we do in service departments. What we've done historically is we've done a survey and then it's there. Data is one thing, how you imply intelligence to that data is the key. So we need to look at linking those things together, understanding what is happening, and then feeding that in particular to the LTP. You've already started that for the annual plan in a small way in your discussions you've had in the last week, which have been reflected in what you have put in terms of the report that is coming tomorrow. But in my view, that is only the start. So the first thing I will assure you of is this. The residents' survey will absolutely be one of the deciding factors as part of the LTP process. That's an instruction I have given in the organisation, and we are building that in. But we need to understand that data, because actually stopping somebody in the street, as Peter has said, you're getting a particular point in time and a message. And I thought the bin example was a very, very good one, Pauline. It's really understanding what our residents are actually saying to us, and that is often complex and contradictory. We have to take that, and something I've been saying to you regularly now for the last few weeks, and I'm going to reinforce it, it is changing the conversation with our public about what we can and cannot deliver, and how we go about doing that together. So it's that expectation management. The final thing I would say in relation to Councillor Daniel's question around perception, you're absolutely right. There's the reality of what a service, what the council's services are and how people see them, and there's the perception of it about historically rose-tinted glasses. 20 years ago we got this, today it's very different. I think in many ways it is. I am not a big fan personally of doing surveys about reputation, because I don't think that changes anything. This thing gives us enough to be able to actually utilise that to help us change how our public view us by working with them differently. So it's a commitment from myself, but we have a big tanker which for 10, 11, 12 years has been going like that, and we've got to find a way to start to make it do that. That's not going to be an overnight job.
Right, thank you, Dawn. So we've got a set of resolutions in front of us, which are simply to receive the high-level results of the surveys and consider the feedback as part of the annual plan and long-term plan deliberations. It's taken as read that we're going to do that, I think it's fair to say anyway. I'm keen to keep moving on because we've got a lot to still do today. Is there any debate on this matter before I put the resolution? Yanni.
Thank you.
sorry, I need a mover and a seconder. I'm happy to move it. Mike Davidson's happy to second. Now we can move into debate. Thank you, Joe, for that. We prompt. Yanni.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that stand out for me in this resident survey. This just reinforces a trend that has been established, and I think you can go back to the post-earthquake situation. People were given the impression that we would have stronger, better, more resilient infrastructure in our city. In fact, the reality is far from that. In fact, what we saw was a huge reduction in the money that was required to actually fix our infrastructure properly. And now, as a consequence, our city is picking up the cost along with our community. And I think that's why you're seeing the huge frustration that infrastructure that should have been fixed properly post-earthquake is not being done. So we had a whole bunch of patch repairs, and what we're seeing is just the disintegration of that work. And it's kind of a shame because it would seem to be a lot of wasted money now that we're just picking up this huge extra cost because central government's no longer involved. So I think, there's some really interesting things in here, but the basics being fixed properly post-earthquake, I think, is at the heart of it. The roads, the footpaths in some suburbs of our city are in an absolutely disgraceful state, and they need to be addressed. And so when people get when we have opportunities and choices around spending lots of money on big projects and we don't have the basics being done properly or well, I think it does create an opportunity for us to look at our budgets and to see where we need to spend the money. Because the other irony to this, of course, is that the longer our infrastructure is deteriorating and not up to standard, the huge maintenance costs we incur. And that's really, a very expensive way to have a city. I think the other thing that I know we've got an external advisory group, and I look forward to considering the use of technology, but I just wanted to place on record, that for some of us who have been around for a long time, we constantly hear that we need to spend more on technology, and there's been a huge amount of money spent on technology, and yet we still seem to be in the same situation of not having technology that really helps us maximise the best spend of our money to addressing the concerns that local residents are raising. I think it was about 10 years ago that Jamie and I said, wouldn't it be great if a local resident could make contact, set up a unique ID on our website, log a complaint, have a unique number, and then follow it up through the process with regular updates. And, we still haven't quite got there. So I'm hopeful that we can learn from what we're being told. We can improve the way we budget and prioritise, because this is very real to some communities around the level of dissatisfaction that they have against us as a city. Thank you.
Thank you. Jake.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to say that clearly this is on. Yep. This is clearly a resident dissatisfaction survey, and it's pretty clear that we need to do better and focus on the essentials and make sure that we don't get defensive and that we're listening to what residents are actually telling us. I think it's pretty clear that some parts of council are doing really well. Everyone loves the libraries, the parks, but clearly roading and footpaths and Three Waters are where we aren't performing as our public would and should expect.
Anne.
Thank you. And just going on from that, I think that we've got large numbers in our community who don't engage and can't engage with this kind of conversation. So in some ways, for them, it's not there's no opportunity for them to give feedback. So I would love this organisation to take on the challenge to find ways to engage with all our residents. We've got a hugely fast-growing multicultural community out our way, for example, and they A, don't understand what council does, B, perhaps come from cultures where you don't engage with local government in any way. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to capture those people's voices. They are the invisible watchers on of the council and the community, and they need to be engaged. So I would ask the organisation to take the challenge to find ways to engage with those residents to get their feedback as well.
Thank you. I've got Jimmy and then Sarah. Jimmy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, as an organisation, continual improvement is most crucial and important. But how do we to continue improvement to recognize our customers, those the residents, all those ratepayers, what they need, what they want, what their expectations is very important. Now, staff down there, I would like to say that's amazing job. More than 8,000 the people feedback from us, from the community and residents. That's fantastic. My view is not only we receive this information, also probably need to break down to each committee, regarding to all those issues. We need to have the thorough, deep, to analyze how to improve, all the service. Otherwise, why we need to be the exist, and also we exist all our money, budget from the resident and the ratepayer. This the very the crucial. The other one is we review the 1.8. This one I'm still a little bit the give us alarm, because if like Star mentioned earlier, if this is the same methodology, however our service general perception reduced a lot from 62 to the 50. This is big warning, It's yellow to red. We need to, as a council, we need to more working together to review deeply how to improve our service. That's very, very crucial. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. I watched a part of a presentation. I didn't get the whole thing because I had another meeting on Tuesday night. And it was a presentation by Carl Davidson, who does a whole pile of research stuff and was asked to do research about Christchurch and talked to many residents around the city. He he was a past Chief Commissioner for Families Commission and those kind of things. So he's got really good in-depth insights into the city, and he talked about a really cool, really interesting concept, the crystallisation of dissatisfaction, and how while people in the city can see a whole pile of the good stuff that's happened and some of the rebuild and the public amenity and other things, and acknowledge the challenges, they've just kind of got to the point where, you know, nearly 10 years on, enough's enough. And they'd expected things to be better by now than they currently finding it. And I didn't get to see the end of it, but I'm going to go back and have a look. It was the Tuesday Club on Tuesday night, and it's available on their Facebook page. Really, really interesting research and a really valuable addition to the conversation that we've been having.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. Look, it's our staff work really hard right across the board, but at times I think there is it is interesting through being dictated to by the Independence Hearings Panel with our district plan. Some of the older suburbs that are kind of not central city but close to that are under pressure through traffic coming from the newer suburbs, driving through them. We've got this amazing vision of our city, but at times in our older suburbs, and this is a residents survey, remember, there is pressure. They come out of their driveways. Through the district plan there has been intensification, but the roads are the same. The keys for me from my area is traffic safety, and yet the budget that we have to traffic safety in urban areas to the big picture is almost nil if you're looking at the zeros. So I'm not surprised in some respects with this. I am disappointed that it's kind of aimed at our staff rather than the big picture. Everyone's doing their best that they can do. Key activity centres, I think ECAN, we've got to talk to them about the hub and spokes model didn't work and it was detrimental to the city. So I think there has to be more hand in hand with them with regards to that, and it's a learning process. I think between our community centres and our central office, there seems to be a disconnect or a misunderstanding perhaps, because our community board staff hear from our communities in my area, and I will concentrate on my area because that's what I know best. There are issues with the quality of our facilities and our parks. People love the parks, but there are ways that we can do this and work with community partnerships. I don't think we've probably, the definition between community partnerships and say further up the ladder than at the community base is different. So I think there are some areas, there is just some miscommunication perhaps or misunderstanding, and it'll be really interesting to dig down. But the two areas for me that are most concerning are the traffic safety in our communities, which out question, it also includes the quality of the roads. But the other thing is the parks services, the actual toilets and the club rooms, etc., which we own and haven't quite got back to pre-earthquake levels. So it'll be really interesting to move forward on this, and I look forward to working with council staff on this and better connecting with our communities.
Right, thank you. So there's been a number of comments around the reasons why the results may be what they are. Certainly Yanni made some comment on the history that may well be a part of what's got us to where we've got to. My focus, and I guess it relates to Dawn's comments as well, these are the results that we've got. The challenge really now is what are we going to do to use the facts that are in front of us to inform what we do next to make the city better and to improve the level of satisfaction residents have got with the work that council does in the city. And obviously that feeds most immediately into the annual plan for our priorities and our decision making there. The timing is perfect in terms of it feeding into the early stages of building the long-term plan and informing our priorities and decision-making there. I think Jimmy's absolutely right when he says that we should look at whether there's something that comes out of this that should inform priorities in the committee work programmes, where there might be some improvements that we can take through the committees and concentrate on some of the areas that are brought to our attention through this survey. There may well be areas that we're already looking at as part of the annual plan and long-term plan process, where we're reviewing not only the results of what we do, but the way we do things. So reviews of service, reviews of efficiency, so that we're better delivering, quite possibly by using different methods or by changing the way we do things to deliver to customer satisfaction. And then I pick up on the point that Anne made, which is around the way that we engage with our communities and the way that communities can really have a good understanding and a good engagement with the work that council does, so that they can better understand and then therefore better comment on that work in a way that inevitably will be more valuable to us as we look to improve the services that people are commenting on through these surveys. So whilst I would have liked to have seen results that are better than we've got in front of us, I think we need to take this as a challenge. And I think we need to look at what we can do through the various processes that we're in control of and that we're driving to ensure that we listen to what the people are telling us, we make changes appropriately, and therefore we can look to improvements in the future. So, Peter, sorry, you wanted to make one further comment?
I'd like to finish on a positive note after a fairly sobering kind of experience.
Yeah.
Just to address some of the questions around the room very quickly. To Anne's point about those who may not be part of the conversation. This is an historic survey. There are other instruments. The External Advisory Group is working very closely with the comms team on focus groups, social media and other ways we can get input into the LTP that are not an old-fashioned structured survey. So that's one. Jimmy's point, we have to respect the feedback, but there is a question that needs to stay in the back of our minds when we look at all this, and that is, are people sometimes expecting the same in a world that has changed? It's not necessarily about what we offer, but where's people's mental space at? And lastly, links to the LTP. I can see some very strong feedback here that is not reflected in what's in the LTP. We've got June till December as a group to work through the plans and budgets to get that right. And that will largely involve making sure that what council sets as levels of service, especially around core services, what they deliver and their responsiveness, that those levels of service are right and they flow through to the people who do the work in the contracts. So there are mechanisms, there is the beginning of a plan shaping here around engagement, around the conversation and around the mechanisms to start to address this stuff.
So, thanks for the further useful commentary. I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, and I do apologise. Just a matter of an oversight in relation to the way that this was presented. So because the existing policy, so we're going back to item 16, because the policy itself currently provides for, rather than people receiving remuneration as directors when they are council, elected members of council, they don't receive any remuneration from the companies that they are appointed to by the council, and the organisations are directed to donate an equivalent amount to recipients specified by the council from time to time, and that is noted in number 1. The unfortunate thing about the way that the next wording was written was that it actually didn't. It talked about directors' fees, and of course, directors' fees are not paid. So there is no remuneration of directors paid directly to councillor directors. So that's the existing policy as it is stated. And what we've been asked to consider by councillors is to agree to change that policy to permit councillor directors appointed to CCHL and Christchurch NZ to personally receive directors' fees for service on the boards. So if we agree to change the policy, then staff would go away and work out the the detail of how to amend the policy. So we're not making the actual wording of the policy. The wording of the policy is as it's set out. So for it to change, we have to show what the change would be. So the debate is, are we going to change the policy to permit councillor directors to essentially receive directors' fees? At the moment, they don't, and that has been the case since 2017, and this would be a change to the policy. And that's what I have been asked as the Mayor to put on the table. I don't intend to support it, but I've agreed that it goes on the table because there were sufficient people who wanted to have that debate. The alternative, so if that is essentially lost and we retain the existing policy, there is a second item that councillors have asked that we consider as a council. And that is that rather than the current policy whereby an equivalent amount is donated to the council, or actually you could actually change number 2 to agree to. So essentially what we're asking is the second question is actually to agree to adjust the current policy to allow councillor directors to individually choose the recipient of the donation. So actually you can remove all of the rest because the current policy would stand. And so if 2 could just simply read, agree to adjust the current policy to allow councillor directors to individually choose the recipient of the donation. So if people vote against number 2, then it is, if people vote against number 2, then it is, then we retain the current policy, and then we move to another one, which is agree to adjust the current policy to allow councillor directors. So there are 2 adjustments that we're going to be voting on. One is the main one, which is that the council directors appointed to CCHL and Christchurch NZ are able to personally receive their directors' fees, which is something that hasn't been allowed since 2017. And we agree to adjust the current policy to allow council directors to individually choose the recipient of the donations. So we need to make a decision on the first one first, and followed by the second one, if that one is lost. If number 2 is carried, then we are changing the policy, and that is the end of the matter. We still have to make a decision about the allocation of the donations for the existing one, because they are paid in retrospect. And so the organisations have been instructed to not pay directors' fees to the directors, so there's no remuneration payable to the directors for this financial year. So anyone that has a question mark over whether there is a self-interest in relation to this particular matter, there isn't, because the fees, the organisations, the 2 organisations have already been instructed not to pay remuneration to councillor directors. So it's just a question of us advising those 2 bodies where to direct a donation to. So that's the only decision, is the second decision, unless there is an agreement to adjust the current policy to allow councillor directors to individually choose the recipients of the donation. And at that stage, then individual councillor directors, if that were carried, then they would be entitled to allocate or to direct those organisations which charitable organisation they were to be given to.
Leanne, can I just say that I flagged that there was a conflict because I was a director of CCHL, but on the basis of that too, I don't feel comfortable voting on agree to change the policy, because by definition I do have a pecuniary interest in it, so I can't vote on the first one.
But you voted on it when it was first moved. You know, when it first came in.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did. You voted against it.
No, I didn't.
So yes, you did. I have the record
in 2017.
of the voting. Yes, you did.
And I wasn't
in 2017.
No, I didn't. Well, you better check the record again, because I didn't.
Well, Ian's got the record there, so perhaps Ian, if you could come to the table and...
That doesn't solve the point that I'm making.
No,
the
no,
point
no,
is I don't want to...
The point
I
is
didn't
that-
vote on it, you can believe me or not, but I didn't. I wasn't actually in the country at the time that you had the debate because I remember that I thought it was a ridiculous decision. But that being said, I'm not going to vote on 2. But that decision can be made. But I'm a director of CCHL, so by very definition, I have a pecuniary interest in it.
Well...
that's for me.
Yeah,
if other people want to, that's fine.
It is up
I just
to
think
an
by
individual.
definition it's a pecuniary interest.
It is and you're voting against your interests if you vote vote against this, you're voting against your own personal interest.
No, I'm saying I'm not voting in it full stop.
No. Yeah, but voting for it would be in your personal interest in the future.
Irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's not the point. The point is I don't want to take part in the vote on it because I have a
that's
pecuniary
fine. You
interest
can
as
do
a director
that.
of CCHL.
You're entitled to
But
do
we were
that.
also told that we couldn't vote on the director pool for CCHL directors. So you, me, Andrew and Sarah were told that we couldn't vote on the director pool for CCHL.
We didn't.
And we didn't. So on the but my view was, well, actually it doesn't affect us because we don't receive the fees anyway.
That's right.
So if that, well, then when we do actually,
exactly the same.
when it could affect us and we could receive the fees, how can we then vote on it in that case?
You can vote on it here. That's what I'm telling you.
And that's
You
what I'm
can.
saying, that makes no
You don't
sense. We
have
couldn't
to.
vote on it when it didn't affect us, but
Aaron.
we can vote on it when it does affect us.
Yeah,
It's crooked.
I always found this paper a little odd because anyone who's on a board who can be paid will have a conflict of interest here. Like, definition of a conflict of interest, a situation in which a person is in a position to derive personal benefit from actions or decisions made in their official capacity. That is by definition a conflict of interest, word for word. So anyone who could receive money from this decision cannot vote.
Ian, we'll have the lawyer answer that question.
And if they can, then we basically never have conflicts of interest anymore, which is good.
No,
Clear it up.
that isn't acceptable for you to make statements like that. Well, I've invited the lawyer at the end of the table to provide us with some legal advice.
Okay. Can I just say that this is not a black and white issue? There is shades of grey.
Thank you.
Maybe not 50, but there are shades of grey. Sorry. The way I'm looking at this is that this is essentially a policy issue that affects every council around the table, not only those that are already on boards, but those with the potential to be elected to boards.
Some more than others.
So you're all involved to some degree or other. So therefore, it would be ridiculous if you all had to step back. So let's approach this in a spirit of inclusion rather than exclusion, and that is something that the Auditor General tries to do, to include people rather than exclude them. But I think there is a basis for including everyone by looking at this as a policy issue affecting you all. You all are involved. That is not to say that if individually you want to step back from voting, you're entitled to do so, and you can. I can't force you, the council can't force you, but if you want to step back, fine.
Could I ask Ian a question then, which might help clear this up for me?
Sorry, did you have another question?
Yeah. Could you help clear up then for me? Then as a councillor director on CCHL, I was told that there was a conflict on myself, Leanne, Andrew and Sarah taking part in the vote on the setting the remuneration pool for the CCHL directors. My view was, well, we're not even paid the director's fee, so it only impacts the independent directors. And the advice at the time there is, yeah, well, it could affect you if the policy changes. So on that very basis, when the policy actually does affect me and directors financially, in my view, that is, by very definition, a pecuniary interest. As in, depending on how that goes, as of tomorrow, something will go into 4 people's bank accounts, actually 5, because you're talking about Christchurch NZ. So that is a pecuniary interest. There are a lot of people that don't have a pecuniary interest in it. Yes, they could if they went through an application process, but they haven't, or haven't been appointed anyway. I just feel that it just... Look, people can make their own call on it. I just think that when it affects your bank account potentially, depending on on the vote, it has a financial impact or a potential to financially impact the said councillors. So I just think that as one of those councillors who was on that board, I can't vote on the substantive about receiving fees.
Yeah, you did vote on the 28th of September 2017.
I wasn't there.
You should, well, I've got the article from the newspaper right here.
Is this when the first decision was made?
Christchurch City Councillors David East and Jamie Goss oppose donating directors' fees to charity.
Is this when we set up the policy?
This is when we set, in 2017, that's when we set up the policy.
No, it was reaffirmed then.
That's 2014.
Oh, sorry, no, it was put in place in 2014, wasn't it?
No,
it was 2017.
But didn't you do it at the start of your...
There were no directors' fees paid from Christchurch NZ,
Was it from 2014?
CDC as it was then, or CCHL directly to councillors.
So the thing is
in 2014 I didn't vote on
There
it.
isn't a problem. It's a matter of policy, as Ian has said.
Yes.
It has been. This is the question of whether we, as a council, agree that when we appoint directors onto boards, because we are the ones who make the decision whether we are going to treat councillors differently from staff members. So staff members do not get paid directors' fees, and the question is should councillors get paid directors' fees? Do they get another bit of remuneration on top of the remuneration that they already get? That is the question.
So the difference between
How can you make that
2017
decision
and now...
if you're going to get that remuneration?
The difference
No,
that's
because it's
heavily
got,
conflicted.
it applies to whoever is appointed.
But by definition, that's a conflict.
The difference
No,
between
it's
like
not.
2017 and
It's
rejigging the
always-
policy now...
Every
was
single
in 2017
councillor,
we
the
hadn't
point
been
that we've
told
just
that we were
heard from
conflicted on the rem
Ian,
pool.
and you can try and shout me down all you like, but the reality is that we have received advice that every single councillor is potentially conflicted because they potentially
Just some more
benefit
than others. So
from the
all
decision.
I'm saying is I sit on the board. I don't want to make a drama out of this. I sit on the board, and now the difference between
You are
2017 and
making
now...
a drama of
well, then
it.
I won't take part.
Mr.
Anyone like a
Goff,
cup of
you
tea
are
upstairs?
making a drama of it, whether you state
turn off the
you are or not. So I've got Jake had his
I will
hand
not
up
take part.
first.
I'm conflicted,
Jake,
I believe, and I won't take part.
Thank you, Mr. Goff. We've got it.
It's a simple question. I take issue with Ian's advice in that we're all equally conflicted. I don't agree with that when only four of us stand to...
Sorry, he didn't actually say that. I said that.
The point I'm trying to make is there's a huge difference between how I'm affected and how the four directors on CCHL are affected.
And that's
Massive
entirely my
difference.
point.
Actually,
Thank you.
I can tell you the exact difference. My question is, would the four CCHL directors be happy to not partake in the discussion?
Yes,
And it would be
that's why I
Christchurch
flagged it. I
NZ.
would prefer
I
not
know
to.
James'
Thank you.
view on it.
You can't ask people to exercise what is something that they hold. We are known, every single one of us is known to be a director. And I am perfectly happy to tell people that I will exercise my vote against changing the policy. I think I've been the one who promoted the policy. It came about because I strongly disagree with double dipping and potentially triple dipping. I think that it's But I have been asked to put this back on the agenda. So I'm not putting this on the agenda because I want it on the agenda. I haven't promoted this, but I'm not going to have councillors determine whether I can exercise my judgment in this matter, and I am entitled to do so based on the advice that we've received.
Could
So
the Auditor
I'm
General
going
provide
to
some advice on
move.
here?
Point of order, the chair's speaking.
I'm going to move to addressing the issue. If individual councillors do not wish to participate in the debate, then they are perfectly entitled to do so, and they can do so on whatever grounds they choose to do so. It is not a matter that I am going to direct a member to behave. I couldn't. So that is the end of that matter, and so I'm looking for someone to move, because I think we should deal with them sequentially. So I'm looking for somebody to move that we agree to change the policy to permit councillor directors appointed to CCHL and Christchurch NZ to personally receive directors' fees for service on the boards. So I'm looking for someone to move that motion. Are you willing to move
I'd like to move that we lay it on the table and get advice from LGNZ on the conflicts.
Yeah.
And if LGNZ say you're all clear, go for it, then, and anyone who wants to set back, if it's the same information, then I'll be comfortable. But until then,
Hang on. If you move a motion that the matter lies on the table, it's a procedural motion, so it has to be accepted. So you've moved it and Jake has seconded it. Is that right?
I'll second it.
Yes, I did. I moved it, I think.
Right. So Aaron Kewen has moved that it lie on the table while we seek additional advice. Is that
from LGNZ, please.
From LGNZ? I don't know whether that's...
Sorry, Leanne, I have not seconded Aaron's...
Sorry, I thought that you were
I was moving the substantive staff recommendation.
Yes, but when I receive a procedural motion, I have to accept it. So you're seconding it, Sam?
Provided we can extend that to the Auditor General as well.
The Office of the Auditor General?
Yep.
So, Ian, wait.
I think that's more appropriate that we get advice from the Auditor General.
Yes, okay.
That's the guideline that I've actually been following, so it would be good to get that clarified. Yes.
So do we have to state where the advice is being received from, or from a procedural motion that the matter lie on the table until additional advice is received?
From the Auditor General,
from
not LGNZ.
From the Office of the Auditor General. Okay. So that additional advice is received from the Office of the Auditor General, if we can write that up. So it's been moved by Aaron Kewen and it's been seconded by Sam McDonald, and I'm required to put that motion without debate. So I will put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. That's lost. So, but I'm presuming somebody will call for a vote. So if... that the report be left to lie on the table to enable advice to be provided from the Office of the Auditor General.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Well, that I can most certainly vote on.
No? Oh, sorry. Can we call the vote, please?
Councillor Tinkleton? And against the...
We are only voting on the procedural motion. Can you use your microphones when you're voting?
No. Councillor McClellan?
I'm in favour.
Councillor McDonald?
Yes.
Councillor Johansson?
Yes.
Councillor Galloway?
No.
Councillor Daniels?
Yes.
Councillor Coker?
No.
Councillor Chen?
No.
The Mayor?
Yes.
Councillor Skendritt?
No.
Councillor Major?
Yes.
Councillor Kewen?
Yes.
Councillor Goff?
Yes.
Councillor Davidson?
No.
Councillor Cotter?
No.
Councillor Chu? Yes. Councillor Tuna?
No.
Yeses and 8 against.
Right, so that's carried. So the matter will lie on the table. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Can we, please? So the next item on the agenda is the Christchurch Housing Initiative. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chair. So we are seeking your approval to amend the Christchurch Housing Initiative from a shared equity loan model to a shared equity ownership model. In other words, in simple, straightforward terms, from a second mortgage to a more common tenants in common approach. This is because the regulatory compliance issues that the provider has found to be greater than expected to deal with, and so is the council, in terms of time and cost, to the extent that it will be too costly and too time consuming to resolve them in a satisfactory way this year, 2020, given what's going on in the wider environment. The parties concerned, i.e. the provider, Habitat for Humanity, the custodian, Covenant Services Limited, and the Crown as a funding partner, are in favour of this approach. The last quick point I'd make, Ms Chair, is that this won't change the underlying fundamentals to the scheme in a sense of households that are eligible to take part in the scheme, the criteria around that, and so on and so forth, of which Habitat, the provider, have identified a short list of 8 households who would be ready to progress further through the initiative, but cannot do so at the moment in the face of this regulatory compliance issue associated with a loan model approach.
Lovely, thank you. Are there any questions? Melanie?
I'm happy to move.
Happy to move. Seconded by Anne Galloway. Is there any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. No, I'm not going to. Okay. All right. All right. So the next item is the Local Government Funding Agency Special General Meeting of Shareholders. Happy to move by Sam McDonald, seconded Aaron Kewen. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. I suspect the next one will be the same. Miscellaneous amendments to delegations, item 9. Happy to be moved by Sam McDonald, seconded by Aaron Kewen. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Do we need to deal with the 2 heritage incentive grants separately or together?
No, separately.
Separately?
Different staff members reporting on them.
Oh, there's different staff members reporting on them, but we'll see how they go anyway. Does someone want to move? Right. Okay, so I'll number 11 is moved by Aaron Kewen, seconded by Andrew Turner. Any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And then Heritage Incentive Grant application for 2 Cunningham Terrace, item number 10. Does someone want to move it?
I can move it.
Andrew can move it and Jake McClellan can second it. So now I'm assuming that there are some questions, are there?
Yeah, I've just got one around the percentage amount. That this is one of the higher percentages I've seen on a property.
Is there staff online? Is there?
Yes, Judith Chain's online.
Judith Chain's online, so
And Brendan's here.
And it's the Judith. Are you
Hello.
in a
Yes, I am.
position to speak about the percentage of the grant, proposed grant?
Yes, but if Carolyn Ingalls is about, she may be able to add more. So in Mr. McMahon's report, he has commented on other grants that have been made, relative recent funding approvals. That's at paragraph 5.1 of his report on page 108 of the agenda. And he notes there's 5 examples given there, and he notes 3 of those were the approved amount was 50%. And I think the Akaroa Lighthouse that you've just approved was 50% as well. So there's some examples of the amount of funding that's been approved in other cases in relation to the percentage of the works.
All right, is that enough for you, Aaron, or?
Yeah, just in the past, that always seemed a lot lower than this percentage-wise. It always seemed like we were chipping in but not carrying half the bill. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was all. And like all the ones we used to do in St Albans and stuff were crikey, 10, 12, 15%. They were small amounts. They were. Oh right, versus the heritage. Yeah, okay. I am thinking of those lower amounts. Or if everyone else is happy, I'll support it as well.
All right, no, it's been moved and seconded. All right, any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Very good. And I'll now move that we exclude the public for the items on the agenda, and I'll just drag that piece of information up. Oh God, don't do that, don't do that. Oh, sorry. I hate my computer sometimes. It tells me I've got to keep putting my password in to authenticate. Sorry. Right. Sorry. That we want Paul Munro, Chief Executive of Christchurch City Holdings, to remain after the public have been excluded for item 13, Development Christchurch Limited, and Steve Walsh, Chief Client Officer, Marsh Limited, be permitted to remain for item 17, Insurance Renewal Update. And I'll just identify the reasons for the exclusions. One is to protect Development Christchurch Limited's commercial position, and that information will be released after relevant matters have been decided and with the approval of the Chief Executives of the Council and Christchurch City Holdings. And the other one is, and I haven't got that agenda open, but it essentially, I think from the topic, you know that negotiations with potential insurers must proceed on a confidential basis due to the commercial sensitivities involved. So they're the reasons for the public exclusion. Happy to move Sam McDonald, seconded by Mike Davidson. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much. So we'll just take a quick